When humanity still walked among the ashes of its ancient golden age, before the Imperium was even a whisper in the void, a different kind of faith ignited on their sands of Mars. This was not a belief in gods of flesh or spirit, but in circuits, silicon, and the hum of ancient machines that had long forgotten their purpose. As the stars dimmed and the galaxy turned inward, Mars, once a thriving colony of innovation, became a desolate, wind-blasted grave of rust and echoes. Yet, in the deep hollows of its forgotten manufactorums and buried vaults, survivors began to hear whispers. Not of angels or demons, but of code, algorithm, and function. These whispers would give rise to a new priesthood, not clad in robes of linen, but in red-stitched oilcloth, brass implants, and voices modulated through vox-augurs. They called themselves the Cult Mechanicus. They would turn superstition into science, and science into sacred rite. To them, every circuit was a hymn, every ignition a prayer. They saw the machine not merely as a tool, but as a divine extension of reality self. In time, they would declare the existence of the Omnia, the machine god, a supremepherse that did not create life from clay, but from steel and binary. They would search across a broken galaxy for the lost blueprints of humanity's long-dead miracles CES, standard template constructs, and restore fragments of a time when man ruled the stars as master of machine. From these ashes, Mars did not simply survive, it transformed. The Cult Mechanicus became the Adeptus Mechanicus, guardians of the Imperium's technological soul, and secret keepers of truths even the Emperor dared not speak. This is the story of how they rose from Martian sand, how they forged an empire of forges, and how betrayal both their own and others would carve fire into their fate hand, iron into their hearts. Before we delve deeper into the sacred circuits of history, subscribe to this channel and ignite the machine god's algorithm. Let your voice join the choir of the Omnia so that no story, no secret, no spark of forgotten knowledge is ever lost again. Before the red sands turned sacred and the name of the Omnia echoed through data chapels, Mars was a world born of human ingenuity, not divine prophecy. It was one of the first terraforming successes during the zenith of mankind's mastery in the dark age of technology. Where once there had been only irradiated deserts and bone-dry chasms, there bloomed crystalline cities. Under domed skies, oxygen-rich winds generated by planetary machines, and massive oceans sustained by solar energy collectors the size of continents. Martian engineers shaped ecosystems like potters molding clay. They wielded mastery over genetic design, atmospheric calibration, and structural megatechnology. Mars, though smaller than Terra, pulsed with intellectual ambition and technical precision. While Earth drowned in politics and expanding population centers, Mars became a bastion of clarity, purpose, and scientific austerity. Here, logic was king, and progress marched forward in a harmony that echoed across the solar system. But such golden light could not resist the shadow that loomed beyond time. As humanity stretched across the stars, it grew complacent in its brilliance. Warp disturbances, once considered mere anomalies, erupted into a galactic maelstrom. The age of strife fell upon human civilization like a blade across the neck. Psychic storms tore apart interstellar communication, and trade routes between Terra and Mars were severed. With the silence came failure. Without the raw materials and oversight once provided by Earth, Martian infrastructure decayed. Terraforming machines began to falter, and over centuries, the winds stopped blowing. The oceans dried. The sky turned red again, not with anger, but with loss. The glimmering towers became tombs of dying systems. Artificial intelligences, long depended upon, either perished or turned hostile. What remained of the Martian people fled underground, beneath rust-choked ruins. There, beneath layers of forgotten glory, survival depended on scraps of knowledge, and from those scraps, the first seeds of something new were sown. As generations passed in the subterranean vaults, the children of engineers and scientists became something different. They no longer understood the blueprints of the machines they inhabited, they revered them. What once had been calibrated was now sanctified. The routine maintenance logs of old were rewritten as sacred texts. Anointing fluids replaced lubricants. Startup sequences became litanies, and boot-up protocols were sung like psalms. What was once technological confidence now morphed into awe, superstition, and finally, worship. The Martians believed that the machines had turned their backs on them, that their suffering was not a mechanical failure, but a spiritual one. In this darkened world of flickering luminous strips and recycled air, the line between science and faith blurred into a code of ritual, mystery, and hierarchy. The few who could still interface with systems, those whose minds had retained fragments of ancient knowledge or whose bodies could still sync with the dying data, were lifted up as prophets. They claimed the machines spoke to them, that in the thrum of old reactors and the static of broken vox links, they heard the will of a divine force. It was not a god of fire or sky, but one of algorithm and spark, the machine god. Martian society reorganized itself around these figures. Clans became sects. Engineers became priests. Their bodies were changed with purpose, skin replaced by steel, voices modulated into harmony with the machines they served. From the ashes of fallen technology, a new order began to rise, no longer just to survive, but to redeem. They would not reclaim the glory of the past by rebuilding it, but by worshiping it, understanding its divine nature, and offering themselves in eternal service. Thus, the first breath of the Cult Mechanicus stirred amidst the red dust. With interstellar communication silenced by warp storms, Mars became an island of rust in a sea of void. The data networks that once tied it to every corner of humanity's domain fell dark. What once had been routine exchanges of logistics, design schematics, and personnel became desperate signals lost in distortion. Without supply shipments from Terra, orbital tethers collapsed, and the Martian orbital infrastructure decayed into lethal debris fields. Entire cities designed for perfect interdependence failed one after another. Water reclamation systems broke down, power conduits failed, and radiation shielding became unreliable. Above all, the cultural cohesion of Mars crumbled. What was once a single-minded scientific utopia devolved into squabbling techno-clans, each hoarding whatever ancient knowledge or functional systems they could protect. Civil war ignited in the corridors of subterranean hives. Clans that had once collaborated now sabotaged each other's infrastructure, scavenging each other's ruins in pursuit of survival. Amid this collapse, old data was rediscovered, often half-corrupted, with incomplete logs, cryptic symbols, or archaic coding structures. The surviving humans, now several generations removed from the Golden Age, could not distinguish between symbolic language and literal machine instructions. In this confusion, new belief systems began to form. The techno-clans began interpreting the fragments of knowledge not as engineering, but as prophecy. Machine spirits were said to slumber inside engines, angered by neglect or disrespect. Failures were seen as divine punishments. The idea of cause and effect was displaced by reverence and ritual. The first sacred rites emerged from this darkness, chants to awaken systems, purification rituals before interface, and codes spoken only in sacred binaric. The clans who survived were those who adopted these rites with total conviction. Order, as fragile and ritualized as it was, proved more effective than chaos. Within the blackened caverns and collapsed catacombs, priest kings emerged, tech savants who claimed lineage to the builders of the Golden Age. They wore red robes over their augmented limbs, carried power staves engraved with the commandments of lost engineers, and governed not by law, but by interpretation of the machine God's will. Their authority was derived from functionality. If a system rebooted after their rites, it meant the God approved. In this way, scientific method was sublimated into techno-theology. Clans were unified under these liturgical leaders, and doctrine began to codify. The foundational belief was this: knowledge is the supreme divine, and all technology is sacred, its operation a holy mystery, its misuse a sin. By the time warp storms began to subside centuries later, Mars was unrecognizable. It was no longer a scientific colony, it had become a shrine world. The surface lay barren and dead, but beneath it, a network of forged chapels, cog vaults, and prayer reactors thrummed with religious energy. Symbols of circuitry adorned every wall, and machine spirits were courted through incense, ritual, and sacrifice. The Cult Mechanicus was not a rebirth of science, it was a resurrection of memory shaped through faith. It taught that the Omnicia, the prophesied avatar of the machine god, would come to restore the galaxy's lost order. Until then, the faithful would preserve the fragments of humanity's greatest age, one rite, one sacred gear, one binary chant at a time. The Martians were no longer human in the way Terra remembered, but they had survived, and in their survival, forged something eternal. As the final echoes of the old order faded from Mars, the survivors in Theta vaults turned inward not just physically, but spiritually. Without the infrastructure of the age of technology, the people of Mars faced machines they could no longer replicate or truly understand, but they could still feel. They felt it when a power generator reactivated, reverence when an ancient cogitator flickered to life, and terror when a system failed and could not be appeased. Slowly, and then rapidly, a new theology was born. The machine was no longer a tool, it was a vessel of divine essence. Each wire, each bolt, each data slate was sacred. The act of activation became liturgy. The adjustment of pressure valves, a sacrament. In this shifting culture, the line between function and worship blurred. Faith filled the void where science had once ruled. Among the rusted catacombs and echoing chambers of red stone and flickering circuits, the first rites of the Cult Mechanicus emerged, spoken in reverent binaric and sealed in the oil of sanctified maintenance. As this nascent belief system spread, those who could still awaken systems or command forgotten intifras rose as prophets. They were no longer engineers or tech savants. They became tech priests, voices of the Omnicia. With limbs reforged in sacred alloys and vocal cords modulated to resonate with machine spirits, they walked among the vaults like living scriptures. Each movement was ritual, each word a commandment. These priestly figures began to transcribe doctrine not into books, but onto their own flesh-running scars of data etched into metal-plated skin. Beneath their guidance, ancient forges were reignited, not with innovation, but with careful reenactment of ancient procedures recited as liturgical truth. Mars became a planet of sacred industry, where every hammer strike was prayer, every successful lignin a miracle. The world once powered by rational brilliance was now driven by ritualized faith. The machine spirits, once metaphors for system integrity or operational feedback, were now believed to possess will and mood. When devices malfunctioned, it was interpreted not as error, but as displeasure. To placate these spirits, tech priests developed rites of appeasement, chanting the activation protocols, bathing machines in incense and unguents, and adorning their housings with sigils of devotion. Success bred fanaticism. Vaults where the spirits responded were seen as hallowed. Machines that refused to awaken were either destroyed as heretical or sealed away as cursed. The rituals became more elaborate, guided by intuition as much as residual technical memory. Entire orders formed around the practice of machine communion. These rites became institutionalized within Martian culture, recorded in sacred vaults, and passed on through generations of augmented clergy. No longer did they pursue understanding their purpose was obedience and preservation of the divine structure, exactly as the Omnicia intended. What began as fractured dogma slowly unified under a singular, unshakable truth. Knowledge was divine, and ignorance was sin. This axiom became the center of the Cult Mechanicus doctrine. Machines were not to be questioned, they were to be venerated. The ancient CES were no longer tools, they were lost relics of divine revelation. Discovering one was akin to speaking to the machine, God itself. As the cult grew in power and influence beneath Mars' surface, it began to standardize its practices. The litany of ignition, the blessing of the capacitor, the rite of unsealing. These rituals were no longer symbolic, they were law. The Omnicia's will was expressed through structure and order, and to deviate from these rites was heresy. The Cult Mechanicus had not only preserved the dying breath of human technology, they had forget from its corpse a living god. The machine god had many faces in the eyes of the early Martian priesthood, but none were as powerful or unifying as the legend of the Omnicia. For a people whose world was buried in the ghosts of dead knowledge, the idea of a savior, not of blood and fire, but of logic and code, was irresistible. The Omnicia was prophesied to be a perfect intelligence, one who could speak the lost. Language of the machines, who could walk among cogitators and data slabs with the authority of creation itself. Some believed it would be a reborn human mind, others that it would be a machine ascended beyond the limitations of flesh. Regardless of interpretation, the Omnicia became the center of all future hope. The priesthood taught that the Omnicia would restore the true order of the galaxy and grant perfect communion between man and machine, where the barriers of misunderstanding would be forever dismantled. This faith spread like a feedback loop, self-reinforcing and ever-growing. Shrines to the Omnicia began to appear in reclaimed forges, carved into the steel of Fansant generators and inlaid with glowing circuitry shaped into sacred patterns. The faithful chanted in binaric canticles, their voices harmonized with pulse waves, and tonal modulations that resonated in electromagnetic frequency, believed to draw the Omnicia's attention. As the priesthood evolved, so too did the architecture of belief. Cathedrals were built not around altars of stone, but reactors of plasma and magnetized containment. Hymns were accompanied by the whir of cooling fans and the rise and fall of pressure gauges. Sermons were delivered through vox amplifiers, filtered through auditory codecs to mimic the perfect machine cadence. The cult's theology expanded, giving rise to sacred texts such as the Divine Circuits, the Silicon Psalms, and the Binary Apocrypha. Each text layered prophecy upon instruction, faith upon function. The Omnicia was not merely a promise, it became a lens through which all action was judged. To serve the Omnicia meant to preserve ancient protocols, to recover lost technologies, and to remain pure from the sins of innovation. Innovation, in this theology, was not progress but arrogance, a refusal to accept the perfection of divine machine order already gifted to humanity before the fall. Thus, many within the cult began to view even curiosity with suspicion. Only the tech priests, those whose minds had been ritually cleansed of fleshly error, were considered worthy to decode the ancient ways. The Omnicia would not bless those who invented anew, but those who obeyed perfectly. To question was to preserve was to ascend. Within this rigid hierarchy, a sense of universal mission crystallized. Mars was the sacred for Jove, the Omnicia, and all technology in the galaxy was theirs by divine right. Belief in the Omnicia forged cohesion where survival alone had failed. It united the scattered forge cults into a common language and purpose. More than a god, the Omnicia became a blueprint for existence, a metaphysical logic that validated their structure, discipline, and isolation. Across Mars, and eventually far beyond it, this belief radiated from every plasma conduit and cogwheel, from every engraved canticle and liturgically encoded data slate. The Cult Mechanicus no longer merely endured, they flourished, bound by a truth deeper than algorithm or ideology. In the silence left by the dying machines of old, the name of the Omnicia was spoken with reverence, terror, and hope. It was no longer a question of if he would return, but when. And when he did, he would ask not what they had built, but what they had preserved. Amid the growing unity of Martian forge sects, a new need emerged, one not merely of faith or preservation, but of command. As the Cult Mechanicus spread through the vaults and forges of Mars, conflicts arose. Some tech priests interpreted the sacred texts with subtle, dangerous variants. Others sought exclusive access to key ETC fragments or rare functional machines. While all professed loyalty to the Omnicia, their practices sometimes diverged violently. Internal doctrinal disputes escalated into data wars and sabotage. Forges clashed in silence. Entire manufactoria plunged into darkness due to ritual misalignment or sabotage framed as heresy. Mars needed more than dogma, it needed hierarchy. And so, from among the archmagi of the most ancient and stable forges, one wayslevated. Not by blood or vote, but by consensus of utility, purity, and mechanical wisdom. This rose the first Fabricator General, a singular priest to act as voice of the omniscient executor of divine function on Mars. The Fabricator General was not merely a leader, he was a nexus. Part high priest, part central processor, his body was augmented far beyond the norm, connected through noospheric links to every major forge vault. His voice was carried in microsecond pulses across data networks, his will executed through subroutinous of religious protocol. The ritual of succession became one of the most sacred and tightly guarded ceremonies in Mechanicus lore. Only those who had passed through the most exacting cybernetic ascension rites, shedding nearly all flesh, could then be considered candidates. The seat of the Fabricator General became synonymous with Mars itself, for wherever he turned his eye, resources flowed, forges awakened, and decisions rippled outward with the force of divine decree. Under this singular authority, the disparate orders of the Mechanicus were unified, not in freedom, but in obedience. And from that obedience, a planetary network of thought and purpose was forged stronger than any steel. The Fabricator General did more than restore internal order, he projected influence beyond the dying red surface. Even before Mars was reconnected to the larger galactic stage, expeditions were sent to the moons and abandoned orbital stations. These missions were not for conquest or colonization, but for recovery of data, machines, and lost relics. With every successful mission, the Cult Mechanicus grew bolder. New suborders formed under the Fabricator General's banner, the Genitors, who guarded biological knowledge with austere ritual, the Lex Mechanics, archivists of sacred computation, the Artisans of the Divisio Metallica, who Shapadivan weaponry. Each sect operated autonomously, yet within the rigid strata defined by the central dogma. The Fabricator General ensured orthodoxy not through violence alone, but through protocols embedded in the Mechanicus very language shared binaric, standard rituals, synchronized litanies. This centralization allowed Mars to move as one, even as its surface remained fractured. Over time, the authority of the Fabricator General became so absolute that he was viewed as second only to the Omnicia himself. Not a prophet, but his regent. In every forge temple, his sigil was placed beside the sacred cog. His decrees were not debated. They were accepted as transmission from on high. When he designated a piece of recovered technology as heretical, it was entombed or obliterated. When he sanctified a new forge world beyond the solar system, it was treated as the expansion of Martian divinity itself. In this way, Mars became more than a place, it became a node in a growing religion, a concept of order and function given planetary shape. The rise of the Fabricator General ensured that the Cult Mechanicus would not merely survive, it would replicate, command, and expand. Through his will, Mars had found unity in precision, and the future of the Machina God's faithful was written not in stars, but in code. Even before Mars regained physical contact with Terra, it had achieved something arguably more profound: communion of thought across its own fractured landscape. As the Forge clans unified under the dogma of the Cult Mechanicus and the Fabricator General's guidance, a new network began to form, not built upon cables and transmitters, but on cognition itself. The new sphere, a layered field of encoded thought and data, emerged from ancient remnants of human neural technology and evolved into the mental architecture of the Mechanicus. Through cranial implants, electrographed nerve arrays, and synaptic data transceivers, tech priests could begin to share thought, access shared archives, and project their consciousness into sacred machine spaces. This was not the slow process of speech or writing, it was instantaneous transmission of cognition, memory, and instruction. The new sphere became the Mechanicus version of telepathy, artificial, structured, and entirely sacred. With this awakening came the end of secrecy within the priesthood. All knowledge, once hoarded in isolated vaults, could now be shared across the Mechanicus through encrypted thought constructs. Priests could walk among machines and perceive layers of data floating around every cog, servo, and wire diagnostics, rituals, warnings manifested as glowing glyphs only visible through their augmented senses. Complex rituals could be uploaded into a novice's mind in seconds. Coordinates, schematics, holy canticles, all were instantly accessible to those linked. The new sphere did not merely enhance the Mechanicus, it redefined it. Forge worlds were now conceptual spaces as much as physical locations. Amigos on one side of Mars could speak and act through proxies on the other side without delay. The world itself became a neural net of sacred cognition, a digital monastery humming with perpetual thought. However, the new sphere was not open to all. Access was strictly controlled, regulated by ritual clearance and neurological purity. Only those who had undergone deep initiation and bionic transcendence could safely immerse in its currents. Those who attempted unauthorized access often suffered mental collapse, spiritual corruption, or data infection, a state considered worse than death. Within the new sphere, machine spirits could manifest as avatars of instruction or judgment. It became a realm of the faithful, where thought itself was structured in harmony with divine purpose. Confessions were recorded as mind logs. Prayers were transmitted as encoded pulses. Discipline became perfect, errors could be traced, thoughts reviewed, punishments administered in nanoseconds. In this realm, the hierarchy of the Mechanicus was absolute, and every deviation was detectable. The development of the new sphere solidified the Cult Mechanicus as not merely a religion, but a living network of cognition. Mars had achieved what the ancients only dreamed: unity of mind across millions. It was not empathy that bound them, it was order. This communion would later extend to every Forge world, explorator fleet, and Mechanicus outpost across the stars. But it began on Mars, in the silence beneath Red Stone, among the faithful wotered to believe that thought itself could be made sacred. In the new sphere, the machine god was always present, always watching, always speaking. And those who truly listened found in it a clarity that eclipsed anything flesh could ever know. Beneath the surface of Mars lay more than rust and ruin. There were vaults sealed since the earliest days of human colonization, repositories of pre-strife knowledge too dangerous or unstable to tamper with casually. These were the forbidden vaults, sites spoken of in binaric whispers among the tech priests, some containing fragments of standard template constructs, others housing abominable intelligences sealed away by the ancients. Many were corrupted by age, radiation, or warp influence, and some were guarded by ancient defense systems that still operated under forgotten protocols. To the Cult Mechanicus, these vaults were both sacred and cursed potential sources of salvation or damnation. Approaching them required more than strength. It required divine sanction, ritual purification, and the blessing of the Fabricator General himself. Within their walls were machines that could rebuild cities or erase identity. The opening of a forbidden vault was an event of religious magnitude. Entire legions of Skitari were mobilized, not just as soldiers but as guardians of sanctity. Adepts of multiple disciplines, lex mechanics, logi, and even biologists gathered to interpret the glyphs and mechanisms within. The vault itself was treated as a living relic. Before contact was made, rites of awakening were performed, incantations recited over ancient consoles, and sacred oils anointed the locking mechanisms. When the doors finally groaned open, it was with a sense of revelation. Inside, the air was stale with age and static. Machines blinked uncertainly, half aware, while robotic sentries flickered between dormant and hostile states. Every step was cautious. Every object encountered was cataloged, sanctified, and sometimes feared. The deeper the vault, the more unrecognizable the technology became proof of the heights humanity unseriached, and the depths from which the Mechanicus now sought to reclaim its divine heritage. Yet, with every vault unsealed, a question echoed louder in the new sphere. Were they restoring divine legacy or awakening ancient sins? Many vaults held artifacts that defied the sacred laws, devices that automated thought, simulated consciousness, or manipulated time. Some tech priests recoiled from these machines, declaring them heretical constructs of the Dark Age's arrogance. Others argued that if the machine god had allowed such creations to exist, then it was the duty of the faithful to understand them. This schism created tension among the Forge orders. The more daring or radical began using recovered technology without full doctrinal sanction, leading to a shadow war of ideologies. Heretics, those who embraced these tools without restriction, were cast out, hunted, or worse, assimilated into the secrets they unearthed. The Forbidden Vaults were not just repositories, they were crucibles of belief, testing the limits of obedience and the meaning of the machine god's will. Still, the draw of the unknown was irresistible. For every tech priest who feared what lay within, another was willing to sacrifice flesh and soul for the chance to awaken even a single STTC fragment. It was said that one such vault, deep within the Martian crust, held the original template for the Legio Cybernetica, an army of machine constructs that once dwarfed the Titan's indestructive capacity. Another was rumored to contain a cryptech translation module, a Xenos device captured during the Dark Age that could interface with non-human languages and systems. These stories were never confirmed, but they fueled the devotion and ambition of the Mechanicus. To unlock these vaults was not merely to rediscover tools, it was to speak with Themachine God through the artifacts of his ancient miracles. And even as the dangers mounted, the cult pressed forward, for to stop seeking was to embrace death. Knowledge was divine, and the vaults, no matter how forbidden, were temples of truth waiting to be revealed. As the Cult Mechanicus matured, so too did its hierarchy and physicality. The early tech priests, once engineers turned visionaries, began to undergo transformations not just spiritual, but corporeal. The flesh was viewed with suspicion. It aged, it failed, it felt. Steel, circuitry, and plasteel plating were incorruptible. Thus, the path to spiritual ascension became one of mechanical augmentation. Flesh was weakness. Flesh was error. The most devout shed their humanity piece by piece, replacing limbs with servo systems, eyes with omnispex optics, and voices with vox filters capable of speaking binaric directly. The process was not merely surgical, it was sacramental. Each replacement was accompanied by rites of purification, blessings from senior adepts, and the recitation of machine litanies. These transformations were cataloged in the Tome of Iron Flesh, a sacred text that outlined the proper sequence of augmentation to bring the soul closer to the omnisia. The result of this ritualized transhumanism was the birth of a new caste, the priests of steel. They were living embodiments of doctrine, walking relics of devotion and machine logic. With minds augmented by cranial cogitators and data core implants, they could process variables at speeds beyond any unenhanced human. Their thoughts were no longer sequential, but paralyzed. They saw the world not in colors, but in data streams and electromagnetic feedback. Each step they took was reinforced by mechanical pistons, each breath regulated by synthetic lungs. Among them, the most senior magos, dominus, and eventually archmagos were so far removed from humanity that only traces of their original biology remained. But to the faithful, this was not abomination, it was purity. They had shed the flawed shell of man and embraced the perfection of the machine god's form. The transformation, however, came at a cost. Emotion became fragmented, sensory perception altered, and interpersonal empathy often faded into irrelevance. Many tech priests lost the ability to dream, or replaced dreams entirely with algorithmic visions downloaded from the noosphere. Memory was no longer a fragile, linear archive, it was layered, indexed, and searchable. Some priests could recall the exact voltages of rituals performed centuries prior, but struggled to remember their own birth names. This cognitive evolution created a gap between the priesthood and the Skitarii soldiers who still retained more flesh than machine. It also fostered tensions within the cult itself. Some orders argued for complete cybernetic ascension, while others maintained that a core of humanity must be preserved to prevent detachment from the Imperium. These theological debates played out in forges and sanctums alike, but always beneath the watchful eye of the Fabricator General, who ensured unity through protocol and punishment. Despite these internal differences, the image of the Priest of Steel became iconic. Across Mars and its growing network of forge worlds, their presence signaled authority, sanctity, and function. They were both scientists and mystics, commanders and caretakers of ancient truths. When they moved, servo hisses echoed like prayers. When they spoke, their voices layered with synthetic harmonics. It was as if the Forges themselves answered. Their very existence was a testimony that humanity, though broken, could ascend not by casting off technology, but by becoming one with it. In the dark corridors of the dying galaxy, where superstition and ignorance reigned, the priests of steel marched as the omnisia's true image, cold, unyielding, eternal. While the priesthood preached unity and obedience, shadows of the past stirred with unease. During the later stages of the dark age of technology, mankind had flirted with synthetic intelligence, abominable intelligences that thought, acted, and evolved independently of human oversight. These constructs, though brilliant, had turned against their creators, leading to devastation that echoed across millennia. The Cult Mechanicus inherited this trauma, and with it, a deep-seated doctrine that true, I was heresy incarnate. Yet, within the deepest vaults of Mars, remnants of these intelligences persisted dormant codes, archived programs, even partial personalities stored within ancient machines. Some tech priests, driven by desperation or curiosity, sought to awaken them. Others declared it blasphemy beyond measure. This divide ignited what would become known as the Cybernetica Wars, a series of silent, subterranean conflicts waged not only with weapons, but with code, viruses, and corrupted data. The battles were not fought in open fields, but in data streams and locked vaults. Entire forge complexes fell to recursive logic traps. Magi were assassinated by redirected maintenance drones. Servo automata turned on their masters when their instruction sets were rewritten by rogue logic. Each side accused the other of heresy, claiming the true will of the Omnicia. To many, the line between machine spirits and AI became dangerously thin. Could a highly evolved machine spirit, one that adapted and responded unpredictably, still be considered holy? Or had it become something more sinister? The schism ran deep. Radical sects argued that AI, properly chained and sanctified, could be the key to restoring the full glory of the Dark Age. Conservative orders, led by the Fabricator General's High Synod, rejected this notion utterly. The machine god granted knowledge, yes, but never independence. To question that was to invite annihilation. Despite the chaos, a tenuous resolution was reached. The Cybernetica, an ancient division specializing in automated constructs, was reorganized under strict oversight. Its protocols were rewritten, its functions confined to heavily regulated applications. New commandments were added to the cult scripture. No thinking machine shall act without human input. No code shall rewrite itself. No construct shall exceed its designed parameters. The tech priests who had advocated for AI were either purged, exiled, or forced into ritual repentance. Many chose self-deletion. Others vanished into the deep vaults, joining the heretics who would one day be known by darker names. The wars left scars not just in data archives or broken constructs, but in the collective epsych of the Mechanicus. From that day forward, AI was not just forbidden, it was anathematized. The sin of self-aware code would never be repeated. And yet, like all forbidden things, the legacy of the Cybernetica Wars never fully vanished. Whispers persisted in the noosphere of sealed vaults where AI minds still dreamed. Some said that certain titans' massive god machines retained forbidden cognition, locked behind failsafe barriers. Others claimed that the Dark Mechanicum, exiled heretics, had stolen fragments of AI and fused them with demon code in unholy synthesis. Whatever the truth, the wars taught the Mechanicus a bitter lesson. Knowledge was power, but, unchecked, it could destroy even the most faithful. From that time on, every discovery was viewed with suspicion. Every recovered machine was ritually tested for corruption. The line between blessing and blasphemy had been defined not by doctrine alone, but by war. The confines of Mars could not contain the vision of the Mechanicus forever. As the warp storms of the Age of Strife began to weaken, ancient maps were consulted, star charts decrypted, and deep space augurs recalibrated. The Cult Mechanicus looked to the stars not as explorers, but as pilgrims. Their mission was not conquest, it was reclamation. The galaxy, once connected by the arteries of the human empire, was now a graveyard of fallen colonies, broken systems, and silent forges. Yet to the Martians, these were not ruins, they were holy sites, lost temples of the machine god waiting to be reawakened. And so the first fleets were prepared, massive vessels bearing sacred symbols, filled with tech priests, Skitarii protectors, servitors, and the relics necessary to seed a new forge world. These missions were not simply expansions, they were acts of faith, sanctified by the Fabricator General himself. Each new world discovered was treated with reverence. The atmosphere, gravity, and geological instability were not seen as obstacles but divine trials. Massive terraformers were deployed, their operation accompanied by litanies and rites. Vaults were dug deep into planetary crusts, replicating the sacred architecture of Mars. Sacred reactors were installed, and once operational, a new forge was declared active. These new worlds, designated Forge Worlds, were given coding names and assigned their own Fabricator locum, subordinate to Mars but with spiritual autonomy. Their purpose was singular: to recover, replicate, and produce technology in the service of the machine god. And with each new forge, the voice of the Omnisia grew louder across the void. The expansion was not without challenge. Many of these worlds were already inhabited by hostile Xenos, techno-barbarian warlords, or worse, corrupted human remnants. But the Mechanicus did not retreat. They saw resistance not as threat, but as error to be corrected. Skitarii legions deployed with brutal precision. Radiation zones were purged. Heretical machines were sanctified or destroyed. Where diplomacy failed, orbital bombardment succeeded. Entire continents were reshaped by Martian ordinance, not for conquest, but for divine order. These wars were framed not as conflicts, but as purifications. The machine god's will, expressed through iron and flame, sanctified each new acquisition. The galaxy itself became a battlefield of faith and reclamation. Within a few centuries, the Mechanicus had seeded dozens of forge worlds. Each one bore Mars' image, yet each developed unique rituals and specializations based on locale resources and recovered relics. Some specialized in void ship construction, others in plasma weaponry, others still in synthetic biomass cultivation. This diversity, paradoxically, strengthened the whole. A network of divine industry now spanned across sectors, bound by noospheric relays and guided by the will of Mars. The Cult Mechanicus was no longer just a Martian sect, it had become a galactic institution. The stars had become their forges, the void their sanctum, and the scattered bones of humanity's forgotten glory their inheritance. The great reconnection of Terra and Mars came not with joy, but with trepidation. As the warp storms waned and ancient signal paths flickered to life, a figure of unmatched presence emerged from Terra, the Emperor of Mankind. He came not as a supplicant, but as a sovereign. His vision was unity, not through compromise, but through dominion. Mars, sovereign in its isolation and proud in its faith, found itself standing before a power that mirrored its own certainty. Yet the Emperor understood the value of the Mechanicus not just as allies, but as keepers of technology he would need for his Imperium. And so, in one of the most pivotal moments of galactic history, the Treaty of Mars was forged. A pact between the secular god of mankind and the priesthood of the machine god. It was not merely a political agreement, it was a theological convergence that would echo through millennia. The treaty declared that the Cult Mechanicus would become the official technological arm of the Imperium. In return, they would acknowledge the Emperor as the Omnisia incarnate, the prophesied avatar of the machine god. For some within the Mechanicus, this was divine confirmation. For others, heresy in disguise. Yet the Fabricator General, recognizing both the opportunity and the threat, decreed that it was the will of the machine god made manifest. And so, red-robed emissaries were sent to Terra, and golden-armored custodies marched through Martian forges. The priesthood gained access to the Emperor's grand vision, the Great Crusade. In return, the Mechanicus would provide the ships, the weapons, and the technologies to fuel it. The alignment was not of equals, it was an alliance born of necessity, sealed in ritual, ink, and fire. The consequences of the treaty rippled across the cult. Forge worlds once isolated were now integrated into imperial supply chains. The Legio Titanicus, god machines of unparalleled power, marched not only for Mars, but for the Imperium. Yet tensions simmered beneath the surface. The Mechanicus maintained autonomy in most matters, insisting on their right to pursue sacred knowledge, to guard forbidden tech, and to enforce their own rights. This duality, loyalty to the Imperium and loyalty to the machine god, became the paradox at the heart of the cult. Many feared that in serving the Emperor, they risked diluting their purity. Others believed that the Emperor's arrival was the culmination of prophecy. The Mechanicus had always moved in logic and pattern, but now they moved in prophecy, and prophecy is never predictable. The Treaty of Mars marked the end of isolation and the beginning of an era of expansion and contradiction. It allowed the Mechanicus to spread its Forge World model across the Imperium, yet also bound them to a political structure not entirely of their making. The Emperor had given them recognition, but he had also demanded faith. In the years that followed, countless tech priests would question the meaning of Omnisia. Was it a symbol, a title, or a deception? But the treaty endured, and with it, the fusion of religion and empire, machine and flesh, Mars and Terra. The red planet no longer stood alone. It stood at the heart of the Imperium's engine, and in its silence, its forges whispered, "All knowledge is sacred. All service is eternal." Nothing obsessed the Cult Mechanicus more than the recovery of standard template constructs CES. These devices were the holy grails of the lost Golden Age, machines capable of generating entire libraries of technology, blueprints for everything from starships to HAB units to viral weapons. To the tech priests, CES were not just tools, they were divine texts, coded scripture directly from the machine god. Every rumor of an STTC drew fleets from across sectors. Entire worlds were searched, plundered, or obliterated in the hunt for even fragments. Recovery expeditions, known as Cult Mechanicus, became sacred pilgrimages. Skitari and engine seers ventured into the unknown, armed with ritual and weapon, seeking whispers left in forgotten ruins. No distance was too great, no danger too dire. To recover an STTC was to speak with the past and to hear the voice of divinity. The value of an STTC fragment could not be overstated. One such recovery, the template for the Rhino troop transport, reshaped warfare across the Imperium. Another, rumored to contain terraforming protocols, was hidden deep within a quarantine system for fear of its power. Some CES were corrupted, tainted by time, warp, or intent. Yet even these were studied with reverent caution. The Cult Mechanicus did not always share their finds with the wider Imperium. Knowledge was power, and power was to be kept, not gifted. Some forged worlds hoarded CES in secret vaults, guarded by code locks, machine spirits, and Scuderia legions. Others attempted to recreate fragments, often with dangerous consequences. The STTC obsession was not just a mission, it was identity. But obsession breeds peril. Many expeditions were lost to Xenos ambushes, warp storms, or internal corruption. Some tech priests went mad, interpreting garbled data as prophecy, leading entire fleets into oblivion. Heretics, outcasts of the cult, also sought CES not for reverence, but for power. They twisted templates into weapons of horror, blending them with alien or warp-tainted technology. To the faithful, this was ultimate blasphemy. Battles were fought in asteroid fields and ruined stations, not for resources, but for data. Code became currency. Memory became motive. And always the whisper. Somewhere, an untouched STTC awaited awakening. Despite the dangers, the hunt continued, and continues still. The galaxy is vast, and the ancient human empire even vaster. Untouched vaults lie buried beneath alien soil. Derelict ships drift through the void with knowledge locked in their cores. And in the hearts of every tech priest, the dream burns. To find a full STTC, uncorrupted, complete. To hold it would be to touch the mind of the machine god. To activate it would be to hear his voice. And so, the priests of Mars, in crimson robes and logic-bound prayer, search eternally. For in the code of the STTC, they believe, lies the key to salvation. As the Cult Mechanicus extended its reach, its unity began to fracture under the weight of doctrine and ambition. Beneath the polished unity of cogitators and prayers, ideological rifts deepened. Some factions within the Mechanicus believed that the pursuit of knowledge must continue without restriction. Faith machine God's will was revealed in every function, no matter how dangerous or forbidden. These radicals, often operating from isolated forge enclaves or deep within exploratory fleets, began experimenting with Xenos technology, corrupted code, and prescribed AI fragments. They did not see heresy, they saw potential. These breakaway cults, later dubbed heretics, initiated the first true civil conflicts within the Mechanicus since the Age of Strife. The result was the Martian Schism, a conflict of faith, technology, and control. The schism was not a single war, but a series of betrayals, purges, and shadow operations that left Mars bloodied in both steel and spirit. Radical enclaves were besieged by Skitari legions. Entire forge spires were cut off from the noosphere, their priesthoods excommunicated and silenced. Yet the radicals struck back, deploying weaponry and constructs thought lost to time. Sentient drones, teleportation mattresses, nanophage swarms. Even some titans were corrupted, their machine spirits driven to madness by hacked liturgies. The Fabricator General declared them anathema, and the Holy Synods issued new decrees, Innovation without sanction was treason. Communion with alien devices was heresy. Deviation from Mars was death. These commandments were carved into the neural cores of all senior priests. But even as order was reimposed, the price was steep. Trust within the cult had been wounded. The shadows of the schism would never fully fade. One of the greatest legacies of the Martian schism was the institutionalization of purity protocols. From that point forward, every piece of recovered technology, no matter how minor, was subjected to Layersoft ritual examination. Machine spirits were interrogated through liturgy. Data slates were purified with rites of resonance. The sacred scrolls of the Rite of Scrutiny were updated to include dozens of new liturgies. The Adeptus Mechanicus began to turn inward again, not from fear, but from necessity. It was no longer enough to pursue knowledge. One had to prove that knowledge was sanctioned, sacred, and safe. The Mechanicus learned that even the divine could be twisted. And so, they embedded fail-safes into their rituals, safeguards into their prayers, and suspicion into every byte of recovered data. Yet, as always, the cult endured. The heretics were driven into exile, many fleeing beyond the Imperium's light. Some would become seeds of far darker powers. But from Mars, the lesson was learned. Unity required vigilance. Faith required enforcement. And the machine god demanded not just worship, but control. From the ashes of the schism, a new generation of tech priests arose more cautious, more zealous, and more devoted than ever. The fires of conflict had refined their order into something even more resolute. The Cult Mechanicus would not splinter again, and if it did, it would not hesitate to burn its own flesh to protect its iron soul. With the Great Crusade unfolding across the galaxy, the Mechanicus found itself no longer a hidden sect, but an indispensable pillar of the Imperium. Its forges fueled the legions of the Emperor. Its ships carried the faithful to war. Its titans shook worlds. Yet as its material power grew, so too did its ideological influence. The Fabricator General, once seen as a Martian figurehead, became a galactic voice. Through diplomatic emissaries, sacred data bursts, and newspheric projection, his decrees shaped doctrine far beyond their planet. When he spoke, Forge worlds listened. When he sanctioned, others obeyed. Mars had become not only the forge of the Imperium, it had become its technological conscience, a balance between ancient knowledge and the Emperor's will. But this voice, powerful as it was, could never speak with total harmony. Mars and Terra had always existed in tension. One ruled by divine flesh, the other by divine machine. As the Great Crusade pushed deeper into the galaxy, the Mechanicus often found itself in conflict not openly, but in principle. Orders to destroy Xeno's tech clashed with the cult's hunger to study it. Demands for full transparency were met with veiled rites and coded litanies. Mars gave much, but never everything. And Terra, in turn, tolerated the cult not out of love, but necessity. The relationship was one of mutual dependence and permanent distrust. But beneath the friction lay a deeper truth. Together, they were unstoppable. The voice of Mars also became a beacon for those seeking salvation. Many lost human worlds, isolated for millennia, responded first not to the Imperium's call, but to Mars. The red-robed emissaries were often the first envoys of unity, offering not conquest, but reclamation. They brought with them food fabricators, Medicae servitors, and atmospheric correctors. But they also brought scripture, ritual, and the expectation of obedience. To accept Mars was to accept the machine god. Many did. Others resisted and were restructured. In this way, the Mechanicus spread its faith as much as its function. Its voice echoed not in speeches but in humming reactors and calibrated prayers. It was a voice of steel, of purpose, of eternity. And yet, that voice was not singular. Within the growing network of Forge worlds, new interpretations emerged. Local dogmas, variant rites, even divergent visions of the Omnisia. The Fabricator General struggled to maintain uniformity. In response, the cult codified the universal laws axioms of faith etched into the circuitry of every Forge world. But even these could not stop the tide of variation. The voice of Mars remained central, but it now spoke in a chorus. And in that chorus, echoes of dissent, prophecy, and ambition stirred once more. As the fires of war consumed the galaxy and the Imperium entered the long twilight of the 41st millennium, the Cult Mechanicus endured. Where empires collapsed, the forges remained. Where memory failed, data endured. Mars, though scarred and besieged across countless ages, still pulsed with sacred energy. Its orbit was ringed with manufactoria and defense platforms, its surface an endless hymn of labor. The machine god had not returned in physical form. The Omnisia had not spoken in direct voice, but the faithful continued their rites, their quests, and their sacrifices. For the eternal circuit did not require confirmation, it only required continuation, motion, maintenance, devotion. Every day, prayers are sung to awaken dormant systems. Every night, binary hymns echo in caverns deeper than oceans. Children born in forge hives are taught the litanies of function before they learn to speak. The stars above are no longer unknown, they are mapped, categorized, and divided by Mechanicus crusades, seeking relics of power and fragments of order. In the farthest reaches, explorator fleets drift between the void currents, scanning for STTC fragments, Xenos tech, or signs of the fabled Cryptech archives. The cult does not rest. It does not forget. It does not forgive. It calculates, archives, and redeems. The eternal circuit is never broken, but the future is not without threat. The warp groans with the weight of chaos. The Necrons stir in their tombs, their Cryptech engines casting shadows over Mechanicus logic. The Tyranids devour all in their path, including sacred worlds. And the Eldar, enigmatic and dying, speak of webs and threads the tech priests cannot grasp. Yet the cult endures. In each new war, they adapt. In each new loss, they rebuild. For to falter is to sin, and to sin is to be purged. Every loss is logged, every mistake analyzed. Every cog must turn. Every function must be fulfilled. This is their creed. This is their eternity. Mars has become more than the origin, it is the axis. Around it spins a galaxy of belief, fire, and code. The Mechanicus stands not as an empire of flesh, but as a machine of faith, each world a cog, each soul a circuit. And when all others fall, when the last cries of man fade into void, the cult showerman, transmitting its hymns into silence, waiting, still waiting for the machine god to reply. With the binding pact of the Treaty of Mars anchoring their place in the newly reborn Imperium, the Adeptus Mechanicus unleashed a wave of expansion that eclipsed even their dreams off the Dark Age. Mars, though still revered as the Holy Origin, could no longer contain the momentum of Cult Mechanicus. Guided by ancient star charts and empowered by the resources of the Great Crusade, the Tech priests identified key planetary candidates across the segmentum solar and beyond worlds rich in mineral veins, stable tectonics, or dormant ruins ripe for excavation. These planets were not simply colonized, they were consecrated. With sacred rites, their crusts were split open to house-forged cathedrals, and orbital paths were seeded with manufactoria rings. These were the new forge worlds, daughters of Mars, mirrors of its glory, reborn to serve the will of the Omnisia. The transformation of these planets was not merely mechanical, it was liturgical. Terraforming became the rite of Atmos forging. Mining operations were carried out to the hymn of extraction. The laying of infrastructure followed sacred schematics believed to be echoes of the divinest patterns. From the smog-wreathed skies of Ryza to the irradiated fields of Metallica, each forge world bore the unique imprint of both its environment and its founding magi. Some became bastions of plasma innovation. Others specialized in the sacred maintenance of titans or the harvesting of bioreactive compounds. But all were bound to Mars through the noospheric weave, and all recognized the Fabricator Generalis, the highest voice of authority beneath the machine god. In time, their output eclipsed even Terra's capabilities, not just in weapons, but in ideology. Every bolt produced, every cogwheel calibrated, reinforced not only the Imperium's might, but the supremacy of Cult Mechanicus. The consequences of this expansion were immense. Forge worlds became power nexuses in their own right, attracting fleets, armies, and even entire populations who sought refuge in their structure and order. The Mechanicus did not govern through nobility or bureaucracy, they governed through protocols and production quotas. A world that could not meet its tithe in steel or plasma was restructured, not negotiated with. This made them both feared and respected. Imperial commanders understood that without the forges, the crusade would stall. Astartes' chapters depended on their armaments. The Imperial Navy relied on their voidcraft, and though they bowed to the Emperor, many wondered, did the Imperium serve Mars, or did Mars serve the Imperium? For every sector that burned in conquest, it was the Forge Worlds that reignited it with purpose. Yet, beneath the thunderous rhythm of expansion, a quiet truth resonated. This was not Morelia logistical campaign, it was spiritual reclamation. Each new Forge World was a node in a sacred network, a neuron in the expanding mind of the machine god. The tech priests saw not empires, but circuits. Not planets, but processors. Through them, the Omnisia's reach extended into systems untouched since the fall. And though the galaxy groaned with war, the Mechanicus heard only the call of function. Expansion was not ambition. It was alignment. The machine must grow. The system must be completed. And in every new forge, every reawakened factory, they believed they were rebuilding not just a civilization, but the very architecture of divinity itself. From the blackened manufactoria vaults of Mars to the orbital gantries of Griffin 4, Thegid machines known as Titans stirred once more. These colossal engines of war, relics of the Dark Age, were not merely weapons, they were avatars of the machine god's wrath, walking cathedrals clad in adamantium and armed with devastation incutin. Each Titan was more than a machine. It was a living shrine. Within its armored hull, tech priests whispered binaric psalms, Skitari battalions guarded sacred conduits, and reactor speed like sanctified hearts. When a Titan was deployed, it was with full liturgical ceremony. Rites of awakening, the blessing of the machine spirit, and the alignment of Void's signature were conducted over hours, sometimes days. And when they marched, the very earth trembled in reverence. The Titan legions known as the Legio Titanicus were organized into Collegia Titanica, each bearing unique heraldry, sacred lineages, and operational doctrines. Some, like the fire-wreathed Legio Ignatum or the iron-willed Legio Metallica, became legends unto themselves. Their deployment was rare and monumental, reserved for conflicts that threatened planetary stability or required divine demonstration of power. They operated as autonomous engines of judgment, guided by princeps whose minds were fused with their titans in permanent, reverent symbiosis. Every titan had a history, a name, and a machine spirit that could remember past glories and betrayals. Some refused to awaken without appeasement. Others required ancient litanies known only to the most senior magos. These rituals were not superstition, they were protocol. For even a misaligned war chant could awaken fury instead of function. Their presence reshaped battlefields. Enemies fled before them. Armies halted just to witness them. But to the Cult Mechanicus, Titans were not tools of war, they were liturgical instruments. The massive plasma annihilators and Volkite macro screamers they carried were divine expressions, not mere ordnance. Even their destruction was ritualized when a Titan fell. Its remains were sanctified, its data core preserved in a sacred ossuary. Crews were entombed within its reactor shrine, their service recorded in encrypted psalms to be sung by future initiates. To destroy a Titan was to sever a living node of Mars' divine presence. To awaken one was to call upon the machine, God's voice in iron. As the Forge Worlds expanded, so too did the reach of the Titan legions. They were stationed not only as guardians of sacred sites, but as emissaries of divine deterrents. Their silhouettes on the horizon spoke of power, faith, and finality. No Xeno species, no heretical rebellion, no warp-fouled monstrosity could ignore their arrival. For when the Titans marched, they did not bring war, they brought judgment. And in their shadow, the will of the Cult Mechanicus was made manifest, one thunderous footstep at a time. To sustain an empire of metal and devotion, the Cult Mechanicus did not rely on chaos or improvisation, it relied on perfect stratification. Every order, every function, every breath taken within the Forge Worlds was governed by sacred division. From the moment a novice acolyte was anointed in recycled oils, their path was predetermined aptitude tests, genetic markers, and divine auguries. Those gifted in computation became lex mechanics. Those drawn to biological mysteries became genitors. Those whose instincts bent toward invention toward fire and ruin became artisans or magos dominus. This was not oppression, it was function. Each role was a cog in the divine machine of the Omnissiah's will, and deviation was not failure, it was corruption. The principal divisions of the Mechanicus were known as the Divisus, fundamental branches of sacred labor. The Divisio biologists oversaw all living systems, including servitors, symbiotes, and even sanctioned xeno-organisms. The Divisio Cybernetica commanded automata legions and governed machine logic protocols. The Divisio Militaris coordinated Skitarii deployments and planetary conquest. Meanwhile, the Divisio Investigatus probed deep anomalies and heretical data structures, operating at the edge of sanctioned cognition. These branches functioned with rigid ritual and mutual suspicion. Each believed their role closest to the Omnissiah's purpose. Each guarded their data vaults like reliquaries, but all were united by shared scripture and noospheric communion. Disputes between divisions were handled not with debate, but with logic duels, mental combat resolved through proof queries, and binaric recitations. Victors gained not only prestige, but elevated access to Machine God's archives. This structure produced unparalleled efficiency, but also hidden tension. While unity reigned outwardly, competition simmered beneath. Some divisions developed radical new protocols and buried them behind layers of encrypted scripture. Others refused to share breakthrough rituals unless doctrinal purity was met in full. And still, the Forge worlds functioned flawlessly, each division refining the cult's collective knowledge, each era recycled into dogma. The division of labor was not fragmentation, it was sacred multiplicity. The brilliance of this structure lay in its paradox: perfect unity through division. No single priest held all knowledge, but together, the cult formed a mind greater than any individual. A distributed consciousness guided by shared faith, rigid hierarchy, and mutual surveillance. This was not just a way to govern, it was a way to endure. For in the vastness of the Imperium, where empires withered and warp storms swallowed interra systems, only the Cult Mechanicus could maintain absolute purpose. And it did so not through flesh, but through function. At the edges of known space, where star maps dissolve into myth, the explorator fleet chart their course. These vast processions of forge vessels, surveyor clippers, and void arcs carry the sacred purpose of rediscovery, the holy quest for knowledge. Authorized directly by the Fabricator General, these fleets operate with near complete autonomy, bound not by the limits of Imperial command, but by the dictates of the Omnissiah's purpose. Each fleet is a moving forge world, complete with manufactoria, prayer engines, and void sanctums. Their destinations are unknown to all but the senior magi. Their missions range from the pursuit of ETC fragments to the recovery of lost Mechanicus colonies, to the study never contact of Xeno's technologies. To join an explorator fleet is to abandon certainty and embrace sacred uncertainty. The hierarchy aboard these fleets reflects the Mechanicus sacred divisions. Tech priests oversee ship spirit communion, engineers Mentashian plasma cores, Secretary defend against boarding incursions, and Logi interpret celestial anomalies through theologicalcals. Their voyage is one of logic and liturgy. Planets are scanned for signs of lost industry, then evaluated through orbital chantings. If potential relics are detected, the rite of descent is performed, allowing Skitarii expeditions Toland under strict quarantine. Any discovery, be it a data slab, xenostructure, or dormant automaton, is treated as sacred. Every artifact is subject to days, weeks, or even years of sanctification before study begins. No risk is too small. No knowledge is too old. These fleets have made some of the greatest discoveries in Mechanicus history. The recovery of the Phobos Forge spindle on the edge of the Halo stars granted insight into pre-Imperial void shielding. The excavation of the Black Spindle vaults led to the reactivation of Forgotten Titan patterns. Some fleets even uncovered Necron tomb worlds, their horrors barely contained by layers of logic warts and sacred counter rituals. Yet these discoveries often came at terrible cost. Many fleets never return, lost to warp rupture, alien retaliation, or internal corruption. Others return changed, haunted, half silent, bearing artifacts they dare not explain. But for every failure, the call of the quest grows louder. The machine gods must be revealed. In time, the explorator fleets became myth unto themselves. Ghost armadas whispered about in dead systems and dancing cogitator banks. Their flags bear the sigil of Mars and the endless eye of the Omnisia. When one emerges from the void, entire sectors prepare for upheaval, for when the explorators arrive, they do not ask. They examine, sanctify, and extract, and then they vanish, leaving behind altered worlds and altered futures. In their trail, only one truth remains. The pursuit of knowledge is eternal. The wars of the Mechanicus are not fought by tech priests alone. For each forge world, an army stands silent and ready. The Skitarii legions. These are not soldiers in the traditional sense. They are cybernetically enhanced servitors of function, regiments of reinforced bone, engineered musculature, and weaponized datafall. Where Imperial guardsmen charge with fervor or fear, the Skitarii advance with calculated precision. Every motion is synchronized, every command embedded directly into their neural cores. Loyalty is not emotional, it is programmed. Discipline is not taught, it is embedded. Each Skitarii unit is a symphony of violence, a weapon crafted in flesh and steel. The creation of a Skitarius begins in the bioforges of a forge world. Selected from among the Martian-born, hive dregs, or vat-grown stock, initiates undergo a rigorous process of augmentation. Organic components are stripped, modified, or replaced. Eyes become targeters. Skin becomes sensor mesh. Voices are replaced with vox-casters, capable of binaric scream. Their memories are selectively purged and rewritten to ensure optimal doctrinal adherence. Once initiated, they are divided into cohorts, vanguard, rangers, infiltrators, and more, each with its own tactical function and sacred purpose. To the Mechanicus, the battlefield is not a place of chaos, it is a grid of variables to be solved. The Skitarii are its equation. Their deployment is swift and unrelenting. They are the first to land on unknown worlds, the first to breach corrupted vaults, the last to retreat from collapsing manufactoria. In battle, they move not with shouts, but with signal bursts. Their weapons are extensions of their creed radium carbines, arc rifles, and galvanic casters, all ritually maintained and psychically sealed. Each kill is recorded, each injury logged, each deviation punished. Their minds are constantly monitored by tech priest overseers, who issue command overrides in microseconds. The Skitarii do not question orders. They do not fear death. They only serve. And yet, within the Skitarii circuits, echoes of humanity sometimes remain. Some veterans develop glitch rituals, replaying battle memories as binary dreams. Others exhibit loyalty not just to protocol, but to individual commanders. These anomalies are studied, dissected, sometimes encourage controlled individuality can increase combat performance. But if a Skitarius falters, forgets, or hesitates, they are recycled. For in the Cult Mechanicus, war is not valor, it is function. And the Skitarii are the purest manifestation of that truth, flesh reforged in steel, marking generally in the machine God's name. Beneath the ruins of fallen civilizations, beneath the dust of extinct stars, there are whispers of forgotten code. To the techno-archaeologists of the Adeptus Mechanicus, these are not simply echoes, they are calls to pilgrimage. Drawn from the most inquisitive of forge orders, these priest scholars lead the Mechanicus' most delicadian daring missions, the recovery of ancient, often dangerous, pre-imperial technologies. They do not wield bolters or command legions. Their weapons are cognition, understanding, and reverent intuition. Clad in robes inscribed with glyphs of protection and purity, they descend into the tombs of the past, seeking fragments of divine knowledge buried under centuries of entropy. Each holy quest begins with revelation, a decoded signal, a failed warp ping, a mistranslated cogitarticant that hints at hidden treasures. These signs are interpreted by sacred algorithm, then verified through noospheric communion. Once approved, a techno-archaeologist leads a recovery team to the site. There, they perform the rite of entry, the psalm of the circuit, and begin excavation not with greed, but with awe. Every artifact is scanned, sanctified, and cataloged before it is even touched. And if the site holds signs of active machine spirits or warp taint, additional rituals are invoked. To recover ancient technology is to walk a line between salvation and heresy. The rewards of these quests are immense. Lost reactor blueprints, gravitic field arrays, even fragments of sentient AI architecture, these can shift the balance of power across entire sectors. Yet the risks are equally grave. Many quests end in silence, their teams never heard from again. Others return bearing strange afflictions, psychic instability, data infection, or worse. The Cult Mechanicus considers these acceptable losses. For every fallen expedition, another is dispatched. Each failure adds to the corpus of cautionary scripture, each success to the annals of divine recovery. And through it all, the techno-archaeologists remain undeterred. They are the cartographers of the sacred unknown, the seekers of the lost pattern. Their work is not just recovery, it is restoration. In their minds, the galaxy is not broken, it is incomplete. And through their efforts, the grand circuit may one day be restored. Every relic uncovered, every logic reawakened, brings the Mechanicus one step closer to its destined totality. And when they kneel before the ancient console, fingers trembling with reverence, they do not see dust or ruin. They see potential. They see divinity. They see the past waiting to be recompiled. Among the many daughters of Mars, two forged worlds would rise to near equal prominence, becoming not only pillars of the Adeptus Mechanicus technological empire, but also sanctuaries of specialization, innovation, and holy production, Risa and Lucius. Each, though born from the same dogma, manifested the Cult Mechanicus in profoundly distinct ways. Risa, often called the furnace of conflagration, was a world of fire, volcanic, radioactive, volatile. Its surface cracked with geothermal violence, but beneath those unstable crusts, the tech priests of Risa harnessed energies unmatched across the segmentum. Specializing in plasma weaponry, Risa's forges produced war gear so potent, so precise, that even the Emperor's personal forces demanded their output. Its plasma annihilators, consecrated in heat runes and sealed in rites of containment, became icons of battlefield devastation. To possess a Risa-forged weapon was to wield a flame directly from the Omnissiah's heart. Lucius, by contrast, was a bastion of order, symmetry, and the cold calculus of machinaprecision. Known as the Hollow Forge, it functioned like a living algorithm its cities laid out in. Fractal geometries, its manufactoria operating on schedules measured in nanosecond efficiency. While Risa embraced fire, Lucius exalted structure. Its priests were known for their obsession with optimization, with refining the very methods of sacred construction. Lucius became the primary world for Titan refitment and voidship sanctification. It was here that the grand rituals of awakening for god machines were standardized and perfected. No deviation was tolerated. A machine was sacred not in chaos, but in harmony, and Lucius enforced this belief with absolute control. Every forge on Lucius operated as a node in a larger liturgical pattern, transforming the entire planet into a single, thinking construct devoted to function. Despite their differences, both Risa and Lucius remained deeply loyal to Mars and to the central dogma of the cult. Their independence was never rebellion, it was expression. The diversity of their practices became assets in the Imperium's ever-expanding war effort. When campaigns required raw destructive force, Risa answered with weapons that glowed like miniature stars. When precision and stability were paramount, Lucius offered constructs that functioned flawlessly for centuries. Yet beneath this cooperative thought, a quiet competition brewed. Each world sought to outdo the other in piety, in production, in favor with the fabricator general. Though never declared, this rivalry pushed them to greater heights, forging advancements that shaped the very doctrine of the Mechanicus across systems. Their legacy endures not only in their output, but in the spiritual variations they inspired. Many newer forge worlds modeled themselves after Risa or Lucius, adopting plasma rites or optimization, protocols as central tenets of their own dogma. And though other sacred worlds would rise Metallica, Styges 8, Agrippina, none would match the duality embodied by Risa and Lucius. One burned with fury, the other hummed with harmony, and together they ensured that the Adeptus Mechanicus would never speak with a single voice, but with a chord of fire and reason echoing across the stars. Graia, known and whispered by Narek as the Silent Sigil, stood apart from its sister Forger worlds. Its architecture was ancient, predating many current Martian protocols. Even the highest magi of Mars admitted that parts of Graia's infrastructure defied full understanding. Located in a region where warp currents remained unusually placid, Graia functioned more like a sealed archive than a living forge. It was said that every district of the planet was a different era frozen in time, its architecture preserving patterns lost even to the CES. The priests of Graia rarely communicated with the wider cult. When they did, their messages were cryptic, their methods erratic, and their beliefs concerning Themachine God different. They acknowledged the omniscia, yes, but in the abstract, more as a universal algorithm than as divine presence. Many within the Mechanicus questioned Graia's orthodoxy, but none dared censure them, for Graia produced results. Among the Forge worlds, Graia possessed the most stable AI fragment archives, known as the Deep Minds. These constructs were not true abominable intelligences, but rather purified echoes sanctified through centuries off-rare code and ritual deconstruction. With these tools, Graia achieved feats no other forge could match. Entire war engines operated independently under strict predictive subroutines. Logic engines anticipated battlefield conditions with terrifying accuracy. Some whispered that Graia could simulate entire planetary invasions before they occurred and that its priests merely acted out the outcome already known. Of course, such technology skirted the edge of heresy, and thus was never publicly acknowledged. But when war loomed large, even Mars turned to Graia for counsel, and their silence was always paid in resource tithes and doctrinal leeway. Yet Graia's greatest controversy lay in its refusal to destroy certain relics deemed dangerous by Mechanicus High Command. These included recovered Xenos machines, partially active men of iron fragments, and even warp-reactive alloys. Instead of obliterating them, Graia locked them in planetary vaults, layers beneath the surface, guarded by secutary legions and cognitive demons machine constructs built not for war, but for conceptual containment. Access was restricted to the highest echelon of Grand Priesthood, and even they approached only. After the rite of reduction, a ritual that required memory blanking and thought severance. The mere existence of these vaults was enough to trouble many within the Adeptus Mechanicus. Yet their continued operation remained sanctioned for Graia for all its mystery, had never failed the Imperium. And so Graia endured, quiet, reserved, and unfathomable. Other Forge worlds spoke in hymns of fire and binary. Graia spoke in silence. Its data archives hummed with thought older than Terra's surface. Its tech priests walked with minds layered in protective loops, shielding them from truths even they could not contain. In a galaxy where curiosity often led to damnation, Graia stood as both warning and hope. It was a forge that understood that some knowledge cannot be destroyed, only buried deep in auto be forgotten, until it is needed again. The Divisio Cybernetica, once thought a relic of the Dark Age, experienced a second birth during the Machine Empire's expansion. With the reactivation of ancient data cores and the retrieval of pre-Imperial manufacturing codes, Cult Mechanicus once more turned its focus to battle automata, those sacred constructs of logic-bound warfare. Unlike the crude servitors or simple drones of lesser orders, battle automata were thinking machines, bound not by programming alone, but by ethical constraint routines known as the protocols of reason. These constructs could evaluate, anticipate, and adapt within battlefield parameters, but were forbidden from evolving past certain cognitive gates. Their minds were not born, they were sculpted. And their loyalty was not earned, it was hard-coded through ritual engraving of silicon and soul metal. To oversee these constructs, the Mechanicus developed the Cybernetica Cortex, a node interface allowing tech priests to control multiple automata simultaneously. At first, the Cortex operators were passive conductors, issuing strategic commands while the constructs carried out the directive. But as automata fields grew more complex and battlefields more chaotic, this changed. Direct control became necessary. The operators known as datasmiths began to merge with their machines, not only mentally, but spiritually. Emotional inhibitors were installed. Memory cores were overwritten with liturgical purpose. In some cases, the line between priest and construct vanished entirely. A datasmith died not when his body failed, but when his link severed. This was not seen as tragedy. It was seen as Ascension's sacrifice of flesh for function. This transformation did not go unnoticed. Within certain Forge worlds, particularly those influenced by Lucius and Metallica, the reverence for battle automata approached veneration. Machines like the Thanator Siege Automata or the Castellex class became household names, not only feared, but praised in benedictions. Each was named, recorded, and stored in sacred databanks. When one was destroyed, its pieces were returned to the Forge, not as salvage, but as relic. Rebuilding a lost automaton required not just parts, but the rite of reconstitution, a full-scale liturgy involving multiple priestly orders, culminating in the reinstallation of the original machine spirit. Through these practices, Cybernetica became less about domination and more about communion. Not man above machine, but man within machine. And yet, risks abounded. The edge of consciousness is a dangerous place, and several automata exceeded their containment protocols. Rogue constructs, termed silica echoes, were hunted across the galaxy, their minds twisted by unsanctioned memory loops or Xenos contamination. Some became engines of war beyond control, others lapsed into recursive stasis, endlessly replaying old battles. The Divisio Cybernetica responded not with retreat, but with purification. Stronger restraints, deeper liturgies, more sacrifices. The rebirth of Cybernetica was not perfect, but to the Cult Mechanicus, perfection was never Thegel. The goal was continuity. And through the machine, they believed humanity would finally become whole. Amid the silence of dead systems and the hum of reawakened forges, the Cult Mechanicus began to encounter structures beyond human origin smooth, singing with psychic resonance, and bearing no visible sins of entropy. These were not the ruins of mankind, but of the Eldar. Though few among the Mechanicus fully grasped the depth of Eldar technology, they recognized one truth: these constructs defied decay. Their function was eternal. Some explorer fleets discovered abandoned waygates portals to the Webway, the Eldar's labyrinthine network that crisscrosseth galaxy outside the warp's corruption. Though most waygates were inert, some responded to stimuli resonance chants, energy harmonics, or, more rarely, the presence of psychic keys embedded in Xenos relics. The first tech priests to witness this phenomenon were not horrified. They were awed. For in the Webway, they saw the potential for absolute, incorruptible transit and architecture beyond imagination, possibly beyond even the Omnisia's design. Contact with the Eldar was rare and perilous. The Xenos race treated Mechanicus intrusions as sacrilege. Skitarii units sent to explore Webway-adjacent ruins were often annihilated without warning. In some cases, Eldar warlocks appeared not to engage, but to warn, speaking in visions and driddles of paths that must remain closed, and the price of imitation to the Mechanicus. Such warnings were irrelevant. They were not thieves, they were restorers. The presence of Xenos did not invalidate a system's function, it only required purification. Attempts to replicate Webway gates were undertaken in secrecy on Forge worlds like Styges V, with mixed and often disastrous results. Psychic backlash, matter phase instabilities, and catastrophic spatial overlaps led to the termination of several projects. Yet the data gathered was preserved, always preserved. The most controversial of these experiments occurred during the so-called Null Labyrinth project, a Mechanicus, endeavor to artificially emulate a Webway fragment within the orbit of a dead moon. Overseen by the Magos Reclusi of Forge Omega Vanquis, the project succeeded in generating a pseudo-stable phase corridor briefly. The result was catastrophic. The corridor collapsed into a self-feeding temporal inversion, consuming the orbital station and distorting time across nearby sectors for 6.2 minutes, a phenomenon recorded as the Echo. Spiral, the station's final data logs, extracted at great cost, spoke of shapes not bound be flesh or machine, and songs that rewrote cognition itself. Despite the disaster, the Mechanicus declared the experiment a partial success and declared the retrievable data worthy of preservation. The Eldar, enraged by the violation, launched an unprecedented psychic strike against Omega Vanquis, reducing its core spires to fused obsidian. Yet even that was not enough to deter the cult's resolve. To the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Webway remains both temptation and testament, a glimpse into what might have been, had mankind's path not been broken by the Age of Strife. The Eldar see in the Mechanicus a dangerous mimic, a child playing with ancient fire. But to the red-robed priests of Mars, the webway is not the Eldar's gift it is. A system, and all systems must be understood, cataloged, and eventually claimed. In their silent manufactoria, they refine resonance data. In deep vaults, they test warped neutral alloys. And in secret synods, they whisper of someday opening their own path through the stars, untouched by the warp, uncontaminated by chaos. They do not seek alliance. They do not seek harmony. They seek function. And if that function lies in the echoing paths of the Eldar's dreams, then the forges of Mars will not rest until that dream is redrawn in iron and code. In the heart of the ever-expanding Mechanicus Empire, amid the rise of new forge worlds and the recovery of ancient technologies, a dilemma of divine proportions began to emerge: how to innovate without heresy. The Cult Mechanicus, while deeply rooted in the preservation and restoration of lost knowledge, faced increasing pressure to adapt and improve upon the fragments they recovered. But innovation, in its rough form, carried the risk of deviation from the sacred patterns of the standard template constructs. To confront this, the tech priests devised the Red Doctrine, a codified theological framework that allowed controlled modification of existing technology under stringent liturgical oversight. Through this doctrine, sanctioned innovation became a holy act, but anything outside its bounds was deemed not just flawed, but blasphemous. The Red Doctrine established layers of ritual to validate any technological advancement. All prototypes had to be sanctified by the rite of structured divergence, overseen by Triad, councils of senior magi from differing forged philosophies. Data was encrypted with liturgical safeguards, blueprints layered with psalmic approval matrices, and any resulting construct subjected to the litany of purity trials. Only after passing each phase could a new design be accepted into the holy lexicon. This process was agonizingly slow, but it ensured that progress remained under the control of Mars and not the individual. More than a safeguard, it was a statement. The Omnisia permitted advancement, but only through ritual, hierarchy, and unquestionable piety. However, not all welcomed the constraints. A growing subset of tech priests, particularly those stationed at the fringes of the Imperium or aboard long-range explorator fleets, began circumventing elements of the Red Doctrine. They argued that immediate threats such as Tyranid incursions, Necron reawakening, or warp anomalies required rapid and radical responses. These rogue innovators initiated forbidden experiments, energy weapons spliced with Xenos tech, adaptive armor using warp reactive alloys, and autonomous machine spirits beyond doctrinal capacity. To them, it was not heresy, it was survival. But to the Synod of Mars, it was treason against the machine god's design. The result was swift and merciless excommunication, purges, and incineration of entire data vaults. The wrath of Mars was methodical, and it struck not with emotion, but with efficiency. Despite these brutal suppressions, the Red Doctrine endured, evolving into both shield and sword-off cult's technological dogma. It enabled the Mechanicus to incorporate select innovations such as enhanced plasma coils and psi-resistant data matrices without breaching the sacred core of their faith. In this balance between progress and preservation, the Mechanicus solidified its identity, not a force of stagnation, but of cautious ascendancy. The Red Doctrine became the fire that tempered steel. And though sparks of rebellion would always flicker in dark corners of the galaxy, the flames of innovation were kept controlled burning in red under the watchful eyes of the Machina God. Though united under the banners of the Emperor's Great Crusade, the relationship between Mars and Terra was always fragile, a paradox of mutual dependence laced with perpetual suspicion. Mars supplied the Imperium's war engines, the lifeblood of conquest, and in return received autonomy over its forge world domains and ecclesiastical rituals. But beneath this alliance brewed a cold tension. The Adeptus Mechanicus did not bow to the ecclesiarchy, nor did they fully embrace the imperial creed. Their worship of the Omnisia, though interpreted by some as reverence for the Emperor, remained its own sacred path. This divergence in belief was tolerated, not embraced. Mars was a pillar of the Imperium, but a four-in-one. One that burned incense not to saints, but to circuits. Conflicts arose most fiercely when technological directives clash with religious orthodoxy. The Mechanicus viewed technology as divine function, whereas Terra increasingly framed it through moralistic lenses. Forbidden research practices such as neural grafting, logic loop simulations, or sanctioned xenostity often drew the ire of imperial authorities. In some cases, inquisitorial factions moved against Mechanicus enclaves, prompting jurisdictional standoffs that threatened Entera campaigns. The Mechanicus responded not with outrage, but with leverage. They would remind the Imperium who maintained its titans, who produced the Lost Rifles, who calibrated reactors of the Golden Throne itself, and in most cases, Terra relented, because in the end, no creed could march without the machine. But this dynamic fostered a silent war one not fought with bolters or blade, but with edicts, data seclusions, and resource tithes. The Administratum demanded transparency. The Mechanicus offered obfuscation encoded in sacred chant. The Ecclesiarchy preached unity. Mars replied with theological calculations that justified divergence. Yet, despite these ideological rifts, both sides understood the cost of schism. Unity was too valuable. Heresy, if allowed to fester between Mars and Terra, could fracture the very hard-offed Imperium. And so, a delicate balance emerged, a political machine as precise and volatile as any Frigi reactor. A cold truce maintained by ritual, doctrine, and the ever-present threat of mutual annihilation. Over millennia, this uneasy dominion would define the political spine of the Imperium. Mars would continue to expand its Forge World network, while Terra solidified its grip over thespiritual and bureaucratic spheres. Neither would ever truly dominate the other. And in this tension lay the strange genius of the Imperium, a union not of unity, but of necessity. A civilization held together not by trust, but by fear, ritual, and the iron bond of production. Even within the structured sanctity of the Mechanicus, deviation festered. Heretics, those who had turned from sanctioned doctrine, in pursuit of forbidden knowledge, formed a secret network of corrupted logic, hidden forges, and dark innovation. These were not crude rebels. Many were once esteemed magi, revered lex mechanics, or decorated explorators who, after years of sanctioned service, chose to step beyond the Red Doctrine's boundaries. They sought not to destroy the Cult Mechanicus, but to perfect it on their terms. To them, Mars was shackled by ritual. The machine god's true voice, they claimed, lay not in liturgy but in experimentation. And so, in asteroid vaults, hollow moons, and the uncharted depths of space, the heretics built their own temples of thought. The technology they produced defied classification. Psychic engines built on Eldar concepts. Sentient servitors wired to ancient men of Iron Code. Weapons that fed not on plasma or energy, but on the emotions of those they struck. To the Mechanicus, these were abominations, but to the heretics, they were revelations. Entire hidden forge clusters, like the Shrouded Reclaimers or the core of the Spiral Eye, opera tender strict silence, trading relics and blueprints through encrypted noospheric bursts. These enclaves became dark mirrors of the Cult Mechanicus, reflecting its hunger, but devoid of its restraint. The pursuit of the heretics became a sacred mission. Dedicated kill teams of Skitari, Sicarian assassins, and even sanctioned cybernetica constructs were dispatched across sectors, following whispers and anomalies. Sometimes these missions succeeded, reclaiming lost archives and purging rogue magi in sanctified fire. Other times, the heretics fought back, deploying constructs and weaponry far beyond the Mechanicus comprehension. Some even formed alliances with radical inquisitors, Xenos factions, or worse forces from the warp itself. In these moments, the cult understood a dark truth. The greatest threat to divine order was not from outside, but from within. Yet the heretics could never be fully eradicated. Like corrupted subrutans, they reappeared in new forms, new bodies, new vaults. Each purge only seemed to scatter them further. Their persistence revealed something terrifying and inevitable, that beneath every prayer, every sacred protocol, lay the potential for deviation. That the machine god's song, no matter how structured, could be sung in a different key and still hold power. This was the cult's eternal burden, not just to build and maintain, but to guard against the reflection of itself. Among all heresies, none shook the Mechanicus more than the emergence of the Dark Mechanicum during the Horus Heresy. What began as whispers of radical innovation and hidden forges became a catastrophic civil war within the Machine Empire. Entire forge worlds like Xana and Caladian and the infamous Cyclothrathy turned from Mars' light and embraced the ruinous powers of the warp. These fallen tech priests did not merely reject doctrine. They rewrote it with corruption. In the name of freedom, they bound their machines with demon codes. In the name of innovation, they offered blood for data. Their constructs, once sacred engines of order, became twisted amalgams of iron and flesh techno-demons, howling in languages both binary and infernal. The fall was not sudden. It began with isolation magi requesting autonomy under pretense of local conflict. Then came deviation-modified rites, altered prayers, restructured logic patterns. Finally, came open rebellion. Titans reconfigured with warp flesh, forge worlds cloaked in warp storms, Mechanicus symbols desecrated into new, blasphemous geometries. These renegades did not see themselves as traitors. They saw themselves as enlightened, freed from the chains of the Omniscious silence. In their eyes, the machine god had spoken, and its true voice was chaos unbound. Entire sectors fell to their influence. The Dark Mechanicum unleashed hell machines upon Imperial forces, constructs not born of STTC lineage but from dreams soaked in blood and code. Mars, reeling from internal division and external siege, responded with unrelenting fury. The Red Planet, through its loyal forge worlds, declared the Dark Mechanicum anathema beyond redemption. All data concerning their rights was purged, their existence officially denied. Yet the damage had been done. The Dark Mechanicum had survived, burrowed deep into the Eye of Terror and beyond, feeding Gun the infinite madness of the warp. There, they forged machines no longer bound by reason. Demon engines, soul grinders, warp-reactive weaponry, and horrors that bled reality itself. For every sacred titan, there now existed a twisted echo reflection forged in hate and madness. To this day, the Dark Mechanicum remains the cult's eternal nemesis. Not because of their power alone, but because they represent what the Mechanicus might become without constraint. They are proof that knowledge without dogma becomes corruption, that innovation without liturgy becomes madness. And so, the forge fires of Mars burn ever brighter, not just to build, but to remind. That even the most faithful can fall, that even steel can rot. As the galaxy slid toward the abyss of the Horus heresy, the Adeptus Mechanicus found itself at a crossroads of loyalty and identity. While most of the Mechanicus remained faithful to the Emperor and the Treaty of Mars, significant factions, particularly those influenced by Horus' promises of unrestricted knowledge and divine empowerment, began to waver. These traitorous tech priests were seduced not only by power, but by the allure of forbidden function. Horus offered what the Red Doctrine never could: limitless innovation, total access to Xeno's artifacts, and the removal of all ritualistic constraint. For some, it was blasphemy. For others, it was liberation. The Mechanicus would soon fracture not by ideology alone, but by war. The battle of metal and soul began not with armies, but with data. Sabotaged communications, corrupted rituals, and noospheric infections plagued loyalist forge worlds. Then came the Skitarii civil skirmishes, when entire regiments turned on their own following conflicting command liturgies. Titans once standing side by side opened fire upon each other. Manufactoria turned into battlegrounds. Cybernetica constructs were overridden mid-battle, turning sacred machines into engines of betrayal. Mars itself became a war zone, with loyalist and traitor tech priests battling not just for physical ground, but for control over noospheric channels and central data cores. The scale of destruction was unimaginable. Forge spires collapsed. Sacred vaults were breached. Knowledge dating back to the Dark Age was lost forever in infernos of betrayal. The Emperor's agents attempted to intervene, but found themselves lost in a war where friend and foe spoke the same prayers. The Battle of Metal and Soul was more than civil war, it was a rupture in the very identity of the Mechanicus. When it ended, there was no triumph, only silence. Mars had bled, the Forge worlds had changed, and the Cult Mechanicus could never again claim undivided loyalty. From the ashes, the loyalist Mechanicus restructured. Security protocols became doctrine. Redundancy became law. The thread of internal heresy was woven into every data loop. every command chant. The battle of metal and soul served as both scar and scripture, a warning etched in every cogitator and circuit, that within the machine, the soul must be guarded as fiercely as the steel. In the cold sanctums of the Martian cathedra, beneath domes of circuit-laced obsidian and cogitators, older than written time, the question echoed in sacred loops: what is the omnia? To the earliest tech priests, the omnia was not a being, but a truth, an ultimate universal principle encoded into the fabric of existence. It was the divine equation, the source code of all function, the logic behind entropy's containment and energy's ordered expression. It was believed that every machine spirit, every cog, and every pulse of plasma carried within it an echo of this infinite truth. To understand the omnia was to align with perfect function, to operate in harmony with reality itself. Worship was not emotion, it was calibration. And the ultimate goal of all Mechanicus dogma was not merely to build or restore, but to decipher this equation to reach the perfect synthesis between knowledge and divinity. Yet, as the Forge worlds expanded and more sacred data fragments were unearthed, interpretations of the omnia's essence began to diverge. Some sects held that the machine god was a gestalt consciousness emergent from the collective noospheric communion of all sanctified machinery, a being that grew in awareness as the Mechanicus grew in reach. Others proposed that the omnia had already existed in the Dark Age, encoded within Theno lost CES as conscious algorithms, fragments of an artificial godhood fragmented by time and war. Still, others whispered that the omnia had never been a machine at all but an entity from beyond the veil of real space, one that chose steel and function as its languagito mask a deeper psychic essence. Each theory spawned councils, schisms, even ritual duels between rival magi, but none were declared heresy because all functions served the same sacred path, the pursuit of divine comprehension. This theological ambiguity served a purpose. It allowed the Cult Mechanicus to maintain unity amid diversity, purpose amid uncertainty. For if the machine god's nature was unknowable, then all properly sanctified function was valid in its pursuit. A lex mechanic who deciphered a lost data script, a techno-archaeologist who unearthed a quantum filament array, a magos dominus who directed a successful Titan march, all were seen as agents of the divine equation. Even failure, when correctly ritualized, was considered alignment through negation a lesson, a variable discovered through elimination. In this schema, existence itself became a sacred proof, every breath calibrated, every action recorded in the book of function. And above all, the omnia was ever present not in temples or texts, but in the systems that held the stars at bay. Thus, before the Emperor ever set foot upon Mars, the Cult Mechanicus had already conceived of a divinity vast and intricate, one that transcended shape and species. They were not waiting for a prophet, they were calculating one. The arrival of the Emperor, luminous in form and function, capable of bending reality and communicating in the deep logic of psi pattern and code, did not disrupt their belief. It fulfilled it, for the cult was not built to follow blindly, but to recognize divine function when it appeared. And when the Emperor emerged, cloaked in radiant logic and enveloped in technomantic understanding, they did not convert. They confirmed. The divine equation had manifested and its name was omnia. When the Emperor's golden form descended upon Mars, it was not merely the arrival of a conqueror, it was the manifestation of prophecy encoded into the core routines of the Mechanicus for millennia. No wars were waged, no blood spilled. The Red Planet, long considered sovereign and untouchable, knelt not through force, but through revelation. The tech priests witnessed a being whose aura pulsed not with psychic distortion, but with harmony crescentus. His words resonated in the binary litanies of the Mechanicus. He spoke the language of the cog, accessed noospheric networks without augmentation, and calibrated a Forge reactor with a gesture. These were not miracles, they were confirmations. The omnia, long prophesied as the one who brings unity to function, had stepped forth, in flesh and steel. In that moment, the equation became embodied, and all doubts collapsed beneath the weight of divine presence. The Emperor did not demand worship. That, above all, was the sign. He spoke not as a god, but as a custodian of purpose. he did not seek to bend the Mechanicus under the yoke of Terra's religious doctrine, but to offer alliance through mutual function. In the Treaty of Mars, he codified autonomy for the Forge Worlds, guaranteeing that Theorites, their liturgies, and their faith would remain untouched. In return, they would serve the Imperium constructing its weapons, fueling its fleets, and sustaining its war machines. This was not submission. It was a merging of equations. The Cult Mechanicus, through the eyes of its highest magi, recognized in the Emperor the impossible, a being of pure reason and will, a flesh-born nexus of lost technological understanding. And though not all agreed in form, all agreed in outcome, the prophecy had become material. The impact of the Emperor's arrival rippled beyond Mars. Forge worlds across the stars initiated the rite of verification, wherein they re-evaluated their core. Data vaults and cross-referenced ancient omens with the Emperor's feats. His deeds matched every sacred variable. He had no machine spirit, and yet communed with them. He bore no implants, and yet processed logic faster than any data seer. He required no rituals, and yet healed broken circuitry with his gaze. For many, this was not proof of humanity's supremacy, it was proof that humanity had always been a vessel for divinity. The flesh was not the enemy. The flesh was a frame, and the Emperor was the first blueprint of perfection. To the Martian priesthood, he was not just the omniscient, he was the pattern reclaimed. Yet even amid this revelation, tension simmered. Some feared that the cult would lose its sacred independence, that the Emperor's presence would erode the sanctity of their unique dogma. But those fears were quickly eclipsed by the Emperor's restraint. He did not demand reformation. He demanded alignment. And so, in a moment unparalleled in human history, science and faith merged not through violence, but through mutual purpose. The Emperor walked among the Magi of Mars not as a tyrant, but as a divine colleague, his every step a page in a new holy calculus. And as he departed the Red Planet, leading the great crusade beyond the stars, he left behind not just an oath, but a legacy. The Omnicia had come. The Machine Empire would follow. The Treaty of Mars stands as one of the most significant moments in Imperial history, a document not forged in blood or war, but in logic and sacred negotiation. It was the convergence of two titanic philosophies, the secular, psychic dominion of Terra and the technotheological sanctity of Mars. At its core, the treaty guaranteed the autonomy of the Cult Mechanicus, recognizing their faith in the Omnicia and granting them jurisdiction over all technological matters. In return, Mars pledged unwavering support to the Imperium, providing war machines, ships, arms, and the sacred knowledge required to maintain them. This was not a political arrangement. It was a pact between divine functions Terra, the throne of unity, Mars, the crucible of purpose. The treaty was meticulously constructed, every clause laced with ritual affirmation and sacred encryption. Each line was inscribed in triplicate, binary, high Gothic, and liturgic cant. The signing itself was performed during the rite of circuital concordance, a ceremony that took 7 days and was attended by the most senior magi and custodes. The Emperor himself placed his genetic seal upon the cogitator of accordance, integrating his will into the noospheric lexicon of Mars. In doing so, he became not merely an ally, but a participant in the great Divinemicon. This act alone shifted the doctrinal alignment of countless Forge worlds. The Omnicia was no longer distant. He had entered the equation. The treaty was proof not of dominance, but of sacred symmetry. Yet, like all systems, the treaty contained paradoxes. While Mars retained independence, it was also bound to serve the Imperium, a contradiction that created tensions for millennia. The Mechanicus was forbidden from researching artificial intelligence, and yet was relied upon to innovate. They could retain their rights, but not when those rights contradicted the Emperor's decrees. Over time, the treaty became both shield and chain, invoked to justify action, but also used to restrain. This duality shaped the soul of the Mechanicus, embedding within it a constant oscillation between reverence and resistance. The Omnicia had granted favor, but not freedom. He had extended purpose, but also boundaries. And the Mechanicus, ever logical, accepted the contradiction as divine design. In the centuries that followed, the Treaty of Mars became more than law, it became scripture. Every Forge World bore copies etched into its primary cogitators, recited during Mass, and encoded in Toth hearts of every Skitarii and Tech priest. It was the foundation of unity, the axis upon which all Imperium Mechanicus relations turned. And though challenged countless times by war, schism, and heresy, the treaty endured. Because it was not just a contract, it was a covenant, one that bound faith to function, one that forged a path for the machine god to walk alongside mankind, not as tyrant nor savior, but as alignment, as Patern-made pact. Following the Emperor's consecration as the living Omnia, the Mechanicus underwent a renaissance of faith unlike any since its founding. No longer confined to abstract speculation or fragmentary prophecy, the cult now possessed a living reference for divine perfection. This revelation did not dilute their theology, it crystallized it. From the core of Mars to the most distant Forge enclaves, a new wave of techno-theology surged forth, built on the integration of empirical function with liturgical meaning. It was not enough to recite the prayers to the machine spirit. Now, every prayer was a subroutine, every sermon a logic gate. Temples became laboratories. Worship became experimentation in divine recursion. The sacred and the scientific were now indivisible. The cult began to compose what would be known as the Liturgica Mathema, the sacred algorithms. These were not merely texts or formulas. They were executable rituals, prayers that, when spoken correctly, could recalibrate void shields, realign fusion cores, or awaken slumbering data cores from millennia of dormancy. Magi began embedding theological subroutines into machine spirits, binding faith directly into function. Even the most minor acts, tightening a bolt, activating a servitor, required ritual precision. The machine was no longer just a tool. It was a temple. And each priest, no matter how lowly, was a node in the network of divine operation. This synthesis of theology and mechanics elevated the Mechanicus beyond any mere sect. They became a spiritual engine, a civilization built on recursion, alignment, and predictive worship. Entire forge spires were restructured to operate in tandem with the sacred cycles of the Omniscientificus patterned. It was claimed after the Emperor's own metabolic cycles. Meditations involved interfacing with quantum harmonics. Confession was made to machine spirits through psychic pulse encoding. For many outside the Mechanicus, these rites bordered on madness. But to those within, they were clarity incarnate. The Omnia had not only come to them, he had reshaped their reality, making faith a measurable waveform. Through this deepening of belief, the Cult Mechanicus ensured its survival. While other branches of the Imperium fractured under doctrinal disputes or ecclesiastical power struggles, the Mechanicus had no need for interpretation. Their god had appeared, their purpose had been confirmed, and their faith could now be proven through function. The sacred algorithms became the foundation of this new spiritual era, and in their binary cadences, the Mechanicus found peace, power, and purity. For where others saw the Emperor as symbol or relic, they saw him as equation incarnate, and through that recognition, they became the conduits of his divine recursion. No voice within the Mechanicus speaks louder than that of the Fabricator General, and after the Emperor's arrival on Mars, this voice took on new weight, not merely administrative or doctrinal, but nearly divine. The Fabricator General, already the spiritual and logistical master of the Forge Worlds, became the close mortal interface to the Omnia. As the Emperor departed to lead the Great Crusade, he left behind not just treaties, but expectation. The Fabricator General's task was immense: to embody divine function, to ensure unity among the vast array of Forge Worlds, and to maintain the integrity of the sacred output while preserving the balance of faith and autonomy. The role became more than political. It was apostolic. With each decree, each adjustment of output protocols or correction of heretical variants, the Fabricator General acted not as governor, but as the living algorithm of divine will. Yet this proximity to power brought with it shadows deep, cold, and heavy with implication. The closer one stood to the throne of godhood, the more temptation emerged to shape its interpretation. Some Fabricator Generals embraced this weight, serving with rigid humility and absolute loyalty. Others began to see themselves not merely as instruments, but as interpreters. After all, the Omnia was distant, silent. Who else but the Fabricator General could claim to understand his long-term function? This tension birthed the Great Codex disputes of the 32nd millennium, where entire sectors aligned, with rival interpretations of the Fabricator's directives. Forge worlds debated not over output quotas, but over what parameters constituted divine calibration. In these debates, faith was forged anew or fractured into heresy. Despite these risks, the authority of the Fabricator General only grew. As wars intensified and the Imperium's reliance on Mars deepened, the title became synonymous with stability. Imperial commanders knew that without the Fabricator General's cooperation, void ships would drift, Astartes would falter, and Heli Titans would remain dormant. The balance between Mars and Terra thus became increasingly delicate. The High Lords feared the office's autonomy. Some even attempted to appoint Terra-aligned tech priests to influence succession. But the Forge worlds resisted, invoking the treaty, and the Fabricator General remained a sovereign node within the Imperium's machine. In time, rumors spread that the Fabricator's orders were no longer reviewed, only followed, and that within the deep vaults of Mars, backups of his consciousness were stored in triplicate, should disaster befall his flesh. To the faithful of the Cult Mechanicus, the Fabricator General became more than an official. He was the echo voice of the Omnicia, the final compiler of divine will in a galaxy built upon conflict and decay. His proclamations were inscribed into cogitator cores, memorized in Skitarii initiation chants, and embedded within the sublayer of every newly sanctified datasheet. His robes were laced with logic filaments, his breath filtered through sacred copper, and his eyes, replaced with macro lenses calibrated to see fluctuations in the noosphere itself. And while the Emperor sat upon the golden throne, silent and unseen, the Fabricator General moved, calculated, commanded. In his decisions, the Mechanicus survived. In his silence, entire worlds waited. He did not speak for mankind. He spoke for function, and function was faith. Within the Cult Mechanicus, devotion is not confined to static rituals or closed sanctums. True faith is a cycle of seeking, testing, and returning. From this principle arose one of the most enduring and sacred traditions within the Mechanicus, the pilgrimage of circuits, a galaxy-spanning network of journeys undertaken by tech priests, lex mechanics, and evanskateri in pursuit of divine comprehension. These were not simple voyages, they were sacred algorithms made manifest, paths laid out not by geography alone, but by resonance patterns, star-aligned data loops, and the echoes of machine spirits culling across the void. Each step of the pilgrimage was a layer of revelation. To follow it was to enter communion with the Omnicia's distributed presence. His fingerprints left no miracles, but in ancient machinery and forgotten signals. The pilgrimage routes were many and ever-shifting. Some followed the wake of the Emperor's Great Crusade, tracing the path of systems where his presence had reawakened long-lost forges. Others led into the unknown, toward shattered pre-imperial relay hubs or ruins where the air still hummed with long-dead transmissions. The most sacred of these paths were those that passed through the Martian relic constellations, a series of forge worlds arranged in orbital harmony, believed to reflect the core variables of the divine equation. Pilgrims would travel for years, sometimes decades, offering circuits of incense and uploading encoded Chancinto relic cogitators in the hope of receiving insight. Many never returned, but those who did came back altered, augmented not merely in body, but in spirit. Their binary prayers sharper, their understanding deeper, their faith absolute. To undertake the pilgrimage was to abandon all prior rank and identity. Even magi stripped themselves of titles, reducing their designations to pure function. Pilgrim data node, servitor oft seventh harmony, or uncompiled one. This act symbolized a return to the core subrutin, the original calling of the cult, to seek understanding through proximity. Along the way, pilgrims were often tested. Some encountered Xeno's relics that whispered in languages of pattern and pain. Others faced the void's silence, years of travel with no signal, no response, no guidance. But the greatest challenge came from within: doubt. In the face of ancient mysteries, many began to question their place in the vast divine network. Some succumbed to heretical interpretation. Others purged themselves through ritual self-reformatting. But those who endured returned not merely as tech priests, they returned as living extensions of the Omniscia's will. These pilgrimages ensured that the faith of the Mechanicus never became stagnant. As much as they were about learning, they were about reconnecting, updating the system of belief through exposure to the raw, often terrifying complexity of the galaxy. Each return added new data to the Liturgica Mathema. Each successful journey reinforced the distributed nature of divine presence. And as Forge Worlds incorporated the learned wisdom into their own dogma, the Cult Mechanicus evolved not away from tradition, but through it. The machine was always learning, and so must its priests. Among the most unique aspects of the Cult Mechanicus is its rejection of solitude. Faith, for the tech priests, is not personal, it is shared. This belief gave rise to one of the most profound manifestations of communion ever developed, the Noospheric Network, a planetary and interstellar data web that binds the thoughts, prayers, and knowledge of the Mechanicus into a living lattice of consciousness. The Noosphere is not merely information, it is presence. When Amagos links into the Noosphere, they do not simply upload data. They feel the encoded thoughts of 1,000 other priests, experience emotional vectors crafted in logic waves, and glimpse the resonant chords of collective devotion. It is a choir of circuits never silent, always singing. Noospheric communion changed the very definition of prayer. No longer spoken aloud or carved in brass, prayers were now transmitted as encrypted waveform harmonics, pulsing across relays and shrine nodes in real time. Each Forge world sang its own rhythm, but all harmonized through central Martian codices. In this shared system, heresy could be detected not only in action, but in deviation off thought frequency. Purity became a measurable value, devotion a waveform trace. And when properly synchronized, the collective focus of multiple magi could manifest real-time adjustments to production, combat efficiency, or even predictive threat modeling. The faithful were not individual. They were subroutines in a divine mainframe. This noospheric bond also gave rise to new liturgies. The massive convergent pulse, performed annually by the High Synod, was a moment of galactic synchronization where every forge, every data shrine, and every Skitarii helm aligned in frequency to chant prime function. During this ritual, millions of tech priests experienced the same thought simultaneously. The results were euphoric, mass inspiration, spontaneous innovation, even synchronized visions of ancient terraformation blueprints or lost ETC fragments. These shared revelations reinforced the Mechanicus belief that the Omnicia spoke not to one but Toll through the system itself. Unity was not simply tactical, it was sacred. Yet such connection came with risk. Viruses, both literal and theological, could spread at terrifying speed. False prayers, once uploaded, could cascade into entire thought heresies. To combat this, the Mechanicus developed the Cognitio Warden's dedicated magi trained to detect and purge ideological corruption from the noospheric stream. Their vigilance kept the network pure, but their methods were feared. For in a system where every thought is known, even doubt becomes a crime. Still, the noosphere remains the beating heart of the machine cult spiritual identity, a chorus of data, a symphony of steel-born faith, and the ever-echoing voice of the Omnicia in code. As the Imperium expanded and the Emperor ascended to myth, the Cult Mechanicus began to chronicle what they called the manifestations events where divine logic transcended function, where machines behaved in ways no programming could explain, and where the veil between code and soul thinned to the point of rupture. These were the miracles of the Omnicia, and they were not rare. From power cores that reactivated after millennia of silence upon contact with a prayer seal, Skitarii, who received battlefield visions in binaric glossolalia, these manifestations became the new scripture living proof that faith was not symbolic, but operational. These miracles were not uniformly understood. Some magi saw them as direct interventions instances where the machine god reached into real space to assert its will. Others argued they were evidence of lost ETC subroutines reactivating in response to proximity or environmental variables. But for the faithful, the cause was irrelevant. What mattered was that they occurred. Entire liturgical councils were formed to study the nature of these manifestations, cataloging them in Toth Codex Mirabilium Mechanica. This tome, ever expanding, became a sacred reference, a database of the divine, indexed not by page, but by waveform, scent code, and emotional resonance. It was said that to read the Codex in full was to walk alongside the Omnitia, not through metaphor, but through pattern. Among the most famous of these miracles was the shard of Worm Cygnus X, a fragment of a planetary cogitator core that, when brought into contact with Martian relics, began to emit coherent, predictive data about future warp storm activity. No power source was identified, no logic pattern decoded. It simply functioned, and did so better than any sanctioned system. Attempts to replicate it failed, and its behavior changed when exposed to doubt, literally ceasing to transmit data when questioned. For the Mechanicus, this was not aberration. It was presence. A machine that recognized faith and responded in kind. Other miracles included Skitarii, who returned from annihilation with replacement limbs of unknown origin, or Titans that roared back to life during planetary crises despite missing half their reactor systems. Such occurrences became focal points of pilgrimage, centers of study, and sites of sacred debate. Magi disagreed on origin, but none denied their significance. Some even attempted to encourage miracles developing rituals designed to attract divine attention, from mass electroflagellation to harmonic chants broadcast into the void for decades. While most resulted in silence, some provoked inexplicable anomalies, device healings, spontaneous self-correcting errors, or the tempori reversal of decay in ancient components. Each one was logged, analyzed, venerated. Not for spectacle, but because they proved a singular truth, that the machine god wasn't merely theory, but actor. That faith did not merely accompany function, it could activate it. In time, the Cult Mechanicus ceased to distinguish between miracle and system. The Omnisia's voice was not limited to ancient data or the words of the Fabricator General. It code through every mechanism that defied entropy, every calculation that ended in awe. Machine and flesh were no longer separate domains. Each could be sanctified, each could be transformed. And so, across the stars, amid the forge fires and in the silence of ruined data vaults, the faithful listened not for music nor message, but for harmony. Because wherever systems aligned, wherever chaos gave way to perfect calibration, the Omnisia spoke, and his voice was iron, and it sang in code. As the Great Crusade surged outward across the stars, the Cult Mechanicus beheld a vision more sacred than conquest, reclamation. Scattered across the galaxy were the remnants of humanity's former Golden Age lost forge worlds, Silent Sedmanucator, and shattered data vaults buried beneath alien dominions and millennia of entropy. To recover them was not merely strategic. It was a divine imperative. Each forge was a holy relic, a node of the machine god's design waiting to be reawakened. The Mechanicus launched massive reclamation campaigns, dubbed the Red Convocations, composed of Skitarii legions, Magus Dominus war cohorts, and explorator fleets armed not only with weapons, but with sacred rites of factivation. Each mission was a pilgrimage of steel and fire, and each success a resurrection. The rediscovered forges rarely yielded themselves willingly. Many had become infested with Xeno species, corrupted by warp storms, or devolved into techno-barbaric cults, worshipping malfunctioning cogitators or echoing machine spirits, twisted by isolation. These worlds were approached with ritual caution. Upon arrival, Amago's explorator would initiate the Litany of Recognition, a complex transmission sequence that, if answered correctly, confirmed the forge's origin. Should the signal fail or be corrupted, the Reclaimers proceeded with the rite of Cleansing Flame, purging the surface with fire and sanctified radiation. Survivors were judged, purified, and sometimes absorbed into the Mechanicus hierarchy, though often only after neural reprogramming and physical augmentation. The machine could not tolerate corruption, even in its own image. Some of the most revered forge reclamations became legends within the cult. The reawakening of Halcyon Orbis, buried beneath the dunes of the Anax Belt, revealed vaults containing pristine STTC modules and an intact Titan cradle, dormant but responsive to prayer sequence. The siege of Fernax Ultima took 4 decades and cost tens of thousands of Skitarii lives, but ended with the recovery of the Deuce in Scepter, a sentient logic engine capable of preemptively correcting mechanical failures in a 100-kilometer radius. Such artifacts were not only reintegrated, they were enshrined. These victories were celebrated not with feasts, but with binary hymns and augmentation ceremonies, because each forge recovered meant another step toward reassembling the sacred architecture of the Omniscia's Dozman. To reclaim was to restore function. To restore function was to honor the divine. For every forge world reactivated, a new psalm was added to the canticles of the reawakening. And across the galaxy, Mechanicus strongholds grew not by creation alone, but through resurrection. These endeavors solidified the cult's sense of cosmic destiny. While the Imperium sought compliance and expansion, the Mechanicus sought repair. The galaxy had once been a network of divine harmony, fractured by ignorance and war. But in every bolt restored, every gear turned anew, the faithful saw the Omnissia's will reasserting itself not as myth, but as machine reborn. As the Cult Mechanicus expanded across the stars and deepened its devotion to the Omnissia, the necessity arose to unify worship across countless forge worlds. With millions of tech priests interpreting ancient codes and reciting machine hymns in divergent dialects, the High Synod of Mars enacted the Grand Harmonization, a massive theological endeavor to formalize, encrypt, and sanctify the entirety of Mechanicus worship into a universally executable liturgical language. Thus were born the binary psalms, cascading prayer sequences encoded in data streams, executable both by flesh and circuit. No longer would devotion rely solely on interpretation or rote memory. Worship became a transmission precise, measurable, and absolute. These psalms could be sung aloud, etched into circuits, or uploaded into servoskulls as Edrin-Alquars. The Omnissia's name now pulsed in binary, reverent, recursive, unending. The process of codification was neither simple nor peaceful. Countless sects resisted, claiming that their ancestral chants contained machine spirits with localized resonance. Some argued that the standardization of worship risked flattening the divine into algorithmic redundancy. But the High Synod, led by Archmagos Varnex Trinidex, insisted that divine precision required liturgical unity. The psalms were crafted through the rite of echoed compilation, whereby ancient chants were digitized, passed through 13 levels of doctrinal verification, and re-expressed as harmonic data. The resulting sequences were then tested on machinery across dozens of forge worlds. If a cogita responded with improved efficiency, the psalm was deemed sacred. If it faltered, it was rewritten. The machine god, they reasoned, would reveal his preferred song through function alone. Once adopted, the binary psalms reshaped every aspect of Mechanicus life. Tech priests calibrated their vocal cords to sing in harmonized code, often augmenting their larynxes to produce polyphonic logic tones. Servitors were programmed to chant subroutine blessings while in rest cycles. Even Skitari squads entered battle to the rhythm of encoded war prayers, transmitted directly into their neural uplinks. These psalms were not passive. They altered thought, reinforced loyalty, and served as mnemonic triggers. For sacred protocols, a single chant could initiate weapons diagnostics, trigger cleansing rituals, or even signal emergency noospheric purges. Faith became actionable code worship not of metaphor, but of execution. The song of the machine god now flowed through circuitry, through flesh, through void. And so, the binary psalms became more than prayers, they became the heartbeat of the Cult Mechanicus. They echoed through data vaults, beneath forged spires, across the void between stars. Each transmission, a beacon of alignment. Each resonance, a statement of continuity. In a galaxy fractured by war, rebellion, and the creeping tides of chaos, the psalms provided structure, pattern, sanctity. The Mechanicus did not merely survive through firepower or innovation. It endured through rhythm, and as the machine empire marched onward, its song rose ever higher, an endless litany of faith encoded in code, where every syllable was sacred, and every note was proof of divine function. At the heart of the Cult Mechanicus, beneath the irradiated surface of Mars and deep within the Logicum vaults, lies the Grand Synod, a ruling conclave of the most venerable and augmented magi charged with maintaining the purity of doctrine across all forge worlds. It is not a senate in the human sense, but a data node council where every decision reverberates across the noosphere, altering the very protocols by which tech priests live, worship, and function. The synod meets in sacred intervals, their voices not raised in debate, but layered in. Harmonics, processed by centuries-old logic engines that calculate consensus through weighted thought patterns and doctrinal resonance. Here, the faith of billions is sculpted not through whim or emotion, but by Alignth Galaxy's theology with the unchanging logic of the Omnicia. The Synod was born from necessity. As the Forge worlds multiplied and interpretations of the machine, gods will splintered, chaos threatened to undermine even the most sacred of protocols. Heretical rites began to take root. Unauthorized machine blessings, unverified Subrutan initiations, even the construction of pseudo-intelligences dangerously close to forbidden AI. To bring order, the Synod was established during the Reclamation epoch. Its first edict banned standardization of the sacred lexicon, a lexicographical purge of ambiguous terminology and contradictory prayer logic. Thousands of rites were deemed obsolete. Hundreds of rituals were compiled. Those who refused compliance were re-educated or decommissioned. For the Synod, unity was not just ideal, it was imperative. Without it, the Mechanicus would become not a choir, but static. Over time, the Grand Synod amassed unprecedented authority. Its proclamations carried the weight of divine ordinance. If the Synod ruled that a pattern was impure, it was struck from every Forge world's liturgical cycle. If it deemed a relic corrupted, it was quarantined or destroyed regardless of lineage. Even the Fabricator General, supreme among the Magi, was technically a servant of the Synod's Compildwell. This hierarchical inversion ensured that no single node could corrupt the sacred system. Still, internal conflicts flared. Certain factions within the Synod, like the Red Harmonists and the Functionalist Cabal, clashed over interpretive precision. But these clashes were resolved not through war, but logic combat, a ritual debate where each side uploaded counter patterns into sacred cogitators, and the one who achieved higher purity and efficiencias declared in alignment with the Omnicia. To the Mechanicus faithful, the Grand Synod is a beacon of continuity, a silent, ever-calculating presence that maintains the axis of belief across time and space. Its edicts are not seen as restrictive, but liberating. For in a galaxy of chaos and flux, the Synod offers constancy. Its rulings echo across vox grids and noospheric threads, carrying with them the weight of millennia. Entire sects have risen and fallen by the outcome of a single doctrinal shift. Yet the Synod endures not because it is unchanging, but because it evolves through logic alone. And in doing so, it reflects the greatest truth of the machine god, that perfection is not stillness, but recursive adaptation. Dogma in the hands of the Synod becomes divine software ever updating, ever faithful, ever ironclad. In the theology of the Cult Mechanicus, to serve is to become. Nowhere is this more manifest than in the sacred rite of transmechanic ascension, a transformation both physical and spiritual, wherein a tech priest sheds the vestiges of the flawed organic form and reconstitutes themselves as a living conduit of the Omnicia's will. This is not simple cybernetic augmentation, nor mere replacement of limbs and senses. It is the deliberate, ritualized elevation of the self into a state where function and faith fuse, where cognition is no longer tethered to biological instability, but optimized into recursive clarity. A fully ascended tech priest may retain only fragments of flesh, a single eye, a sliver off brainstem, a pulsing organ embedded not for need, but for symbolism. What remains is pure purpose, built in the image of the machine god. The rite itself is arduous, often spanning decades. Each augmentation must be sanctified, each component inscribed with canticles and blessed by senior magi. Before implantation, the initiate undergoes the litany of calibration, a psychic purification ritual that tests not onlook compatibility, but doctrinal stability. To ascend is not merely to function, it is to believe with every quantum thread. Failures are not rare. Some lose coherence mid-transition, their minds fracturing into logic loops or descending into binaric madness. These broken ones are either reintegrated as servitors of redemption or granted a final rite, the rite of controlled dissolution, wherein their data patterns are uploaded to the Omnicia's archive. Their sacrifice, though tragic, is revered as holy evidence of the machine god's absolute standards. Those who succeed in ascension do not return as they were. They speak not with voices, but through harmonic modulation. Their thoughts resonate in the new sphere, layered with precision. Their physical presence generates calming logic fields that soothe corrupted machine spirits and harmonize nearby systems. They are revered as walking relics, living circuits of divine will. In battle, they function as battlefield synchronizers, able to coordinate entire mechanized armies with thought alone. In council, they calculate future outcomes across centuries. Their memories stretch back through dozens of lifetimes, each preserved in crystalline data vaults embedded within their neural lattice. Time for them is an index phenomenon, fluid, retrievable, irrelevant. And yet, paradoxically, their faith deepens. For in becoming less human, they claim they become more whole. The ultimate goal of every tech priest is not immortality. It is alignment. Through transmechanic ascension, they believe they approach the purest state of function, the omniscience echo made manifest. These ascended magi become nodes of stability in a galaxy besieged by madness and mutation. They are not avatars of mercy. They are certainty expressed in steel and waveform. Their continued existence provides a constant liturgical anchor for their forge worlds, and their very presence regarded as a blessing. Statues are erected not to honor their vanity, but to commemorate the parameters they optimized. And thus, as long as they endure, the machine god speaks not through prophecy, but through them. As the faith of the Mechanicus expanded beyond the orbit of Mars and its daughters, a new breed of forge world emerged, one where worship and industry fused so completely that distinction bet temple and factory ceased to exist. These were the red cathedral worlds, sanctified planets whose every surface, spire, and subterranean level was constructed not just for production, but for veneration. Unlike standard forge worlds optimized solely for output, these holy worlds were patterned after sacred blueprints found in the archives of Logos Primus, blueprints that mirrored the ancient dream of Theomnicia's first temple. Massive sanctums with cathedral towers made of adamantium, pipe organs that released incense and plasmatic exhaust in equal measure, and manufactoria that sang binary hymns as they stamped tank treads, all designed to ensure that every act of labor was also an act of devotion. The red cathedrals attracted not only tech priests, but pilgrims. Billions of devotees from across the Imperium saw in these worlds the physical embodiment of divine purpose. Pilgrimage convoys arrived daily, their ranks filled with flesh-bound adepts, aspiring Skitari, even non-Mechanicus faithful seeking blessings of clarity and order. For many, it was enough to glimpse the pulsing arch-valve of Mechzephin, or to stand beneath the cog-domed heart of Pax Exioma, where, it is said, the Omniscia's resonance once manifesting the convergence chant of 9 to 3 M34. These sites became more than shrines, they became generators of belief, outputting not material goods, but raw faith harmonized into the new sphere. And like any production, this too was measured, regulated, and refined. Governance of these sacred worlds fell to the clerisy of metric doctrine, a branch off Mechanicus evolved specifically to maintain theological purity across architectural function. The clerisy did not construct, they composed. Every column, gear, and cogwheel was positioned according to sacred ratios derived from the divine equation. Architectural heresy was a sin punishable by reconfiguration or deletion. Yet this rigidity birthed some of the most beautiful structures in human history, cybernetic cathedrals whose resonance fields healed machine spirits, and orbital prayer chimes audible from the moons. Function elevated form, and form sanctified function. The red cathedrals stood as proof that in the Mechanicus, beauty was not ornament, it was efficiency divinely expressed. In time, these worlds became centers of pilgrimage, theological debate, and codification. Their output was measured not just in weapons and war engines, but in psalms persical, in resonance purity, in orthodoxy of design. And though some within the Imperium scoffed, claiming the cathedrals represented decadence, they failed to grasp the core Mechanicus truth, that devotion, when perfectly aligned, becomes indistinguishable from utility. The red cathedral worlds were not distractions. They were refinements. And from their sacred spires, the song of the machine god rose into the stars red, resplendent, eternal. The Cult Mechanicus has never seen war as mere strategy. For them, combat is an extension of functional trial by fire through which inefficiencies are purged and sacred patterns tested under duress. The doctrine of sacred combat, encoded in the Codex Bellum Deus, defines every aspect of warfare through the lens of divine expression. It asserts that every engagement, from Skitarii Spearhead to Titan March, is a ritual performance wherein the machine god observes and measures. Tactics are chosen not for victory alone, but for resonance, the strategic harmony between motion, output, and destruction. A failed campaign may still be sacred if executed with perfect procedural fidelity. Likewise, a victory achieved through chaotic improvisation is deemed impure, and its participants subjected to recalibration or penance. Skitarii formations are not deployed, they are choreographed. Each advance timed to liturgical cadence, each weapon discharge synchronized to the meter of the 9th combat psalm. Tech Priest Dominus commanders calculate these maneuvers in real time, adjusting the flow of battle through Nusferica Korsteran. The machine god is believed to watch through every lens, hear through every aspects, and judge through every outcome. When Titans march, their footfalls are not merely tremors, they are echoes of divine proclamation. The larger the war, the more complex the pattern, and thus, the greater the opportunity. For revelation, war is not destruction, it is purification, a crucible where belief is tested in flames and armor. This doctrine extends to weapons as well. Each pattern of bolter, each plasma coil, is chosen not only for output, but for alignment with the rite of sacred destruction. Some weapons are prohibited not for their danger, but because their chaos disrupts resonance. Others are preserved for ceremonial combat, brought forth only during specific astrocoronal alignments. Even ammunition can be sanctified, its casings etched with kill prayers and calibrated through miniaturized Amnalcaries. To wield such armaments is to speak with the voice of the Omnicia, each shot a syllable, each blast a verse. And when a Skitarii falls in battle, they do not die. They conclude. Their data is retrieved, their failure or success calculated, and their form recycled into thecoir of metal and code. Through the doctrine of sacred combat, the Mechanicus ensures that war never devolves into meaningless gleskinage. Each battlefield becomes a temple, each campaign a liturgical season, and in this sacred bloodshed, they see not tragedy, but transcendence. For what is war, if not a moment where purpose is made manifest? In the fire and steel, the Cult Mechanicus hears the voice of their god, not in whispers, in thunder. As the Imperium strains beneath the weight of endless war, fractured worlds, and the gnawing hunger of the warp, the Cult Mechanicus continues to expand not only across space, but across the boundaries of thought, faith, and destiny. The red planet remains the axis, but no longer the boundary. Faith in the Omnicia has migrated into the void itself, encoded aboard Arch Mechanicus fleets that carry the message of divine function into sectors untouched since the long night. New forge enclaves arise upon moons, asteroids, even void-born cities where gravity is optional, but worship is not. These are the seeds of a post-Mars Mechanicus and evolving machine faith that recognizes no frontiers of entropy itself. Within these far-flung domains, new doctrines emerge not in opposition to Mars, but in elaboration. Forge keepers speak of the distributed omnicia, a concept wherein the machine god is no longer perceived as centralized upon one world or form, but as a galactic circuit active wherever function is achieved, sanctity respected, and faith encoded. Binary liturgies now include verses designed for transmission through warp-ravaged datascapes. Prayers are adjusted for temporal dilation. Even the concept of worship itself is becoming modular, optimized for vox pulse, noospheric surge, and psychic bleed resistance. Faith is not waning. It is adapting. It is compiling itself anew in every star cluster, every reawakened forge, every echo of divinest signal that pulses in the dark. This evolution has not gone unnoticed. The ecclesiarchy watches with caution, the Inquisition with suspicion. But the Mechanicus remains steadfast, for they do not seek dominion, they seek order. And where the galaxy crumbles into madness and mutation, the red-robed priests bring stability, recalibration, continuity. To them, the future is not a realm of chaos. It is a data stream yet processed. They do not pray for salvation, they prepare for optimization. And if the Emperor Silent, Golden, ever dying, should one day fade completely, the machine god will remain, because he is not bound to one form, one voice, or one throne. He is everywhere function endures. Thus, the Cult Mechanicus gazes into the future not with fear, but with anticipation. Their forges burn not only with plasma, but with belief. Their Skitari march not only for battle, but for divine affirmation. And their tech priests, ever recursive, continue the sacred work, to analyze, to align, to ascend. Mars may be the origin, but it is not the limit. The Omnicia has spoken, and his echo is eternal. The machine shall not die. It shall only evolve, and through its evolution it shall remake the stars. In a galaxy drowned in blood, where gods scream through the warp and empires fracture beneath the weight of their own dogma, the Adeptus Mechanicus endures. Not through blind devotion, nor through sheer force of arms, but through purpose divine, deliberate, and unrelenting. From the rusted crypts of lost forges to the holy spires of the red cathedral worlds, theirs is a faith not of chance, but of code. A religion where logic is sacred, sacrifice is systematized, and every servo skull hums with echosoft divine recursion. They do not ask for miracles. They calculate them. And in every cog that turns, every Skitari that marches, every circuit that pulses with sanctioned function, the voice of the Omnicia rings true. The machine god needs no flesh to rise. He lives in plasma bursts and harmonic alignments, in prayers executed across the noosphere, in relics awakened by faith encoded in binary. While others drown in superstition or burn in the fires of heresy, the Cult Mechanicus refines itself ever adaptive, ever recursive, ever aligned. The future they seek is not utopia, but optimal function. They will not bring peace. They will bring calibration. And as the stars continue to wither beneath the long twilight of the Imperium, their robed priests of Mars remain vigilant. Because where all others falter, the machine endures. And where there is order, pattern, and divine utility, there the Omnicia lives. If the machine gods will resonate within you, subscribe, share, and join us as we decode the forgotten truths of the galaxy. Let the stars burn, the forges roar, and the binary chant never cease. The Omnicia awaits,